Well, hi, everybody. It's Alison here on the McDowell sofa back on the East Coast. And I'm here with Jason. And hi, Jason. And so I called Jason up. Was it last night? I don't know. Maybe it was
Yeah,
last night.
it was yesterday or last night.
I don't give a lot of notice. And if people haven't, anyway, I don't have a whole lot of coverage these days in the social media world, but I did put up a new blog post that's sort of meshing together a lot of different ideas I have about vibration and natural communication systems. And it merged into a review of a horror movie and cells, and Stephers connected me with some great articles about the language and the noise of cellular membranes. And so I called Jason up and I said, listen, I don't know, I think you actually had maybe sent me something too. And there'd been a couple things recently where it just seems clear that there's a lot of talk about, crypto and Web3 and money. But people are missing largely the part about econophysics and biophysics and membranes and vibration and noise and communication, and particularly how it relates. I'm concerned about the community currencies, the digital community currencies, because I can see that they're being set up as the answer to the CBDCs. And I think if we understood the nature of money better in a broader context, we might be able to sidestep some of those pitfalls. So I called Jason. I'm like, you're the expert in the community currency space. Jason's whole sort of background for a long time has been understanding the nature of money. And the premise is that most of us largely misunderstand what money is. And I kind of jumped forward and I'm like, it's a signal, it's a signal. So I said, let's just have a short conversation here to unpack a little bit about your backstory about navigating the landscape of money, and then where it went after we added in Web3, and then what it might mean in terms of the transition towards Web3 digital programmable exchange as something that is a global coordinating mechanism for a biohybrid superintelligence, right? And that's something that a lens that I'd really like to put out for people is to consider this possibility. So anyway, we just wanted to talk about this a little bit. We're not saying that, we've got it all locked in and we know exactly how it's going to go, but I think that there are pieces of the story that are missing, and they're important because the narratives as they're being shaped are steering people in certain directions. And if you don't understand some of the missing parts, you're going to be used to advance an agenda that may not be the agenda you actually thought it was.
Well, as far as me being an expert, 10, 15 years ago, I was very heavily into that space. And, we talk a lot about solutions, and to me, I was like, oh, this is the answer. This is the solution to all, not all, but a lot of these problems. So I was very, very immersed in the whole, in that whole world. But the problem with that now is I'm having to play catch up because, when I was involved with it, the Satoshi paper hadn't even come out. There wasn't anything, there wasn't any discussion of blockchain, and certainly nothing about complex adaptive systems and signals intelligence and there
might be economic signals, right? But they weren't talking about it in terms of at a granular individual level, per se.
Right, exactly. Even the concept of programmable money, or it wasn't even a thing. It was more just a way to facilitate, exchanges that were really between individuals and between, local businesses. That was what attracted me to it, so there's actually talk about mutual credit systems. And I still find, if you strip away all the other bad stuff that's involved that we're learning about, impact finance and all these other things, I still, a lot of those ideas still very much appeal to me, but they're not what, they're not what I thought.
Exactly.
They're not as pure as what I thought they were. There were other elements to this whole thing that I am very much opposed to. So I'm in this difficult situation because I'm having to reanalyze and rethink a lot of the stuff that I was once advocating.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of us are in that position. Like, I mean, you operate from the information you have at the time, right? In good faith, and you do your due diligence, but there's often huge pieces missing because they're missing from the picture on purpose. And once you're committed to a certain course, I would say it's human nature to defend the course that you've chosen, even as more and more evidence may mount up that the information you had, if not was inaccurate, was incomplete. And if you had more information, you would see it differently.
Especially if you built up a community around that story.
Right.
You know?
Exactly.
And I think that's another big part of it.
Right. Well, and I will say, so like within the past month or so, I had 2 interactions with people that I don't really know, but who are operating in that space and have been for a long time. And it was quite interesting to me because in this situation, it was very different outcomes. There was one individual who approached me, who was unable to, when I was talking about like money, I don't think it is exactly what you think it is. I think it's a signal. I think it's a coordinating mechanism. Could not tolerate that whatsoever. And it became sort of ugly and sort of vaguely threatening by the end of the exchange. And even though that wasn't how I said, I don't think you actually understand what you're building here. But this is how I see it. I see it about engineered consciousness that's attached to tokens. And up front, it looks like money. But if you back it up, it looks like something else. And it was not a very good exchange. But then shortly thereafter, there was another individual who had also been in the space for a very long time, who, despite the fact that they had been engaged, as have you been engaged in advocating, was very open-minded enough to consider the new information and to start to like reflect, and then to figure out, well, how could we start to explain that to the communities that have been built around this idea? And you know, to me, like it was interesting just to see these 2 different scenarios play out with people who on a certain level were at, you know, where you've been, but took 2 different tacks on it. And anyway, it's very heartening to see that when there are people who can pause and reflect, and then not from a place of blame, right? Like, oh, I feel terrible because more like we didn't know. Right? We didn't know the bigger picture, and then try to figure out what to do next. Like knowing what we know now, how would we proceed?
Yeah.
So.
When I'm not opposed to the idea of local community currency, as long as it is absent of these other aspects of it, which and I don't know how that can be done. So it's a difficult situation to be in terms of, you know, people wanting to have some sort of answer, wanting something to work for, something positive, which is totally understandable. Like we all want to work towards something positive, but we want to make sure. Yeah, but we want to make sure what we're building isn't going to be putting us into a new trap and a new set of problems that maybe are just as bad, if not worse, than what we were dealing with before. So, I mean, if you listen to any of these talks, I'll agree with them 100% about all the problems with the current system and the system as it's been up until this point. And I even agree with them about, you know, the potential of some of the solutions, but it's a limited conversation. They're not talking about it in terms of, well, I mean, they'll talk about like social impact, finance, and these other things, but they won't. They're not putting it into the framing here that you and I have been talking a lot. I mean, all the stuff that we've been talking about for 3 years, it's just not incorporated into that discussion, and I think it needs to be.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, I mean, the other piece of this is problem, reaction, solution, right? It's like, okay, we have this problem and it's a real problem and it's bad. But to imagine that they're not going to transition you into a pre-planned solution that's the answer to resolve the crisis that's been made is naive, I think. These systems have long-range plans, 20, 30, 50, 100 years out, and then backup plans. So once you get a handle on the problem, reaction, solution, you can see the narrative shaping. And this is what I pointed out with crypto, is that the FTX and the greedy libertarian anarcho-capitalist crypto bros, the antithesis to that is going to be some sort of cooperative mutualism populism, right? Whether that's left or right leaning, and freedom loving with tokens. And that's how it's going to go. And, community building, whatever kind of community you imagine. And yet it's not our game and it's not our tools. They might let you imagine that you're going to start to program around the edges of some of the rules of the tokenization. But the ultimate game board was built off of military defense tech, defense technology and finance technology, the merger of, and when I say defense, I'm not just talking about guns and tanks and bombs. I'm talking about psychological warfare, that side of defense, right? And so we're literally entering onto a game board of psychological warfare where we're going to be invited as players to play. But as Kevin, Werbach always says, be the game designer. We're not the game designers. They might like for us to imagine that we can design little bits here and there. But ultimately, when you look at, Andreessen Horowitz and, all of the BMS behind impact finance and cybernetics, it's whatever token, literally tokenized participation we have, it's not going to meaningfully change the course of how this rolls out.
Yeah, and there's different layers to the protocol that supersede all the others. So they might let you have a little game on one little layer, but you're going to still be a subset of another layer that's dictating the direction of this game. And on the FTX thing too, the problem, reaction, solution. They're like, well, the problem was it was a centralized exchange, and it was backed by the research Alameda research token. So it was like so. People are using that as an example of why we need DeFi and why we need stable coins. And so you see these things being used as reasons for building the thing.
Well, and
that
backing
maybe
coins with real assets, right?
That's exactly. Yes, the stable coin. Yeah. And in real assets is a question too, because a lot of times when they're talking about backing it with real assets, they're talking about backing it with dollars. Like PayPal just created a stable coin that's backed 1-to-1 by US dollars. And so again, it's like, wait a minute, like if the dollar is not stable, but we need stable coins in order to stabilize the system that's backed by dollars. Like,
right. What? It's like.
And then you just look at the players too, like ETH Denver, you'll see a lot of these different groups that are building these little things. But if you start to dig a little bit deeper, you'll find, it's connected to this larger protocol that has all these relationships with all these other large corporations and banks, the very institutions that have put us into the mess that we're in. So it's very incestuous.
Well, and they do, but it's in the spectacle. Right. So, I really think about ETH Denver as a performance. It's almost kind of like a participatory art performance, right? Yeah. Like people come and they pitch their projects and they're small. And this is something I've always I've talked about too, is like, okay, so where do these smaller bits fit into the IBMs and the Ciscos and the Oracles and the Hewlett Packards? Like, because that's the bigger like legacy infrastructure. These, the little Curve Labs and, these other bits and pieces, they're significant and you should watch what they do, because that's a signal and that leads you to show, like it's a shadow that reveals where the trajectory is headed. But it's not going to be Curve Labs that scales something. It's going to be IBM, right? It's going to be these larger tech companies that are doing that work. So, yeah, but the thing I wanted to point out too is that a lot of times I think people get caught up in talking about the money piece at the expense of the signal piece. Like, why are they doing this? And the why matters, like the why that you imagine, because that's the motivation. And so a lot of people might imagine like the why is like to get the most money or to boss the most people around and control the most people, make people miserable. And I'm not saying it's none of those whys. Sure, there's money to be made. Sure, there's power to be asserted. But I think actually, once you look into the complexity, the next phase is this biohybrid computational system using society that becomes tagged and managed as a method of computing something. Now, I don't know what the task is that we're supposed to be computing. And often people say, well, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, it's like those reCAPTCHA. You do something to prove you're human, but on the back end, something else is happening. Duolingo was the same way. You think you're learning a language through an app, but on the back end, it's doing bad translation stuff. There's something you're doing on the surface, but on the back end in a way that the average person would never guess, something else is happening. And so I feel like the use of the digital identity systems at every scale, our individuals, our family units, our neighborhoods, all of it with this metadata attached. It's not just about controlling us and making sure that we don't eat too many cookies, or that we've recycled, or which, yeah, it may be, but that's a limiting conversation. Ultimately, once we're tagged in the game mechanics of Web3, in this ubiquitous computing surveillance, I have a new post I'm going to be putting out from Leo about extending the parametric insurance and talking about, it's fractal. It's all the way from, a nano center up to the sensor, up to the satellite systems. We're living in a computational environment. And so once we're tagged in that computational environment, our interactions can be used to create patterns and emergent information. And so the tokens of the community currency, sure, they represent a value exchange, but at a bigger level, once you have it programmable, you can actually create parameters to steer behaviors, not to contain them entirely as some totalitarian method, but to leave enough leeway that people come up with creative solutions, and that creativity in a social context is what they're actually after.
Yeah.
As I see it.
Well, I think about academia a lot in terms of that's what they do, is they give you a sandbox to work in, but they also kind of steer you and nudge you and guide you, but giving you the idea that you've got this academic freedom when you really don't have true academic freedom. There are constraints, and people learn those, they internalize those. They may not even be consciously aware of it, but it's
what's going to get the grant, what's going to get you up for tenure, what's going to get published.
Exactly. But they'll give you some leeway. So they'll here's the question that we want answered. Here's the problem we want solved. Go solve it, and we'll give you the freedom to solve it. But if you say, well, I actually want to pursue a different question, and maybe I think that what you're doing here is actually not good. Good luck with that.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's hard to wrap, I think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around, because you do kind of have to imagine this thing that you're not actually, we're not seeing, implemented yet, even all these currencies. So I was thinking about this, all these tokens for the most part, they're not, I haven't found too much actual day-to-day use of them. So in terms of actually people using them over exchanges, I mean, there are some people are using them within these spaces on DAOs for voting and things like that. But I think it's hard for people to wrap their mind around, because it's almost like, it's like we came from the future and we're like, hey guys,
it's coming. Beware.
It's right around the corner.
It's interesting, the tokens, because someone, Quantum Heart Cafe is someone who's done some guest posts, and I have another one that I need to put up from them. And they're very interested in the token economy and the history of that, the Skinnerist behaviorism, with it starting out in prisons and preschools and mental institutions, right? So those token economies have a really deep history, and you have to wonder, the people who are pushing this idea of tokens, there's the script history, which has its own thing around company towns and labor, organized labor, or suppressing organized labor. Then you've got the token economies. Now, sure, sometimes you have things that happened during the Depression that were authentic grassroots mutualism, right? I don't know, I've seen pictures of clamshells where you'd write IOUs on, or something like that, on the Pacific Coast. And so some of those are more less regressive than others, but there are a lot of regressive models of token economies that don't get talked about. And I think one of the biggest token economies out there right now is probably happening in school classrooms. because all of the behaviors, these PBIS tokenized behavior charts that are going onto digital wallets now, like I don't think at their blockchain, they're not decentralized, but they're training these generations now already in alternative exchange tied to behavior. So, in the adult version, I've talked about in the past in Philadelphia, were these Recycle Bank, which came out of a Wharton alum, where you put a sticker on your recycle bin and you would get rewarded for your neighborhood recycling. Well, you put out your recycling not because you're getting points to get like a 10% discount on at a store. It's just trash day, and you take out your trash and you take out your recycling, right? But it was this early model of these alternative payment systems for behavior.
Well, there was Bernard Lietaer used to always talk about Curitiba, I think was the name of the town in Brazil, about that. They had this big problem of trash, and then they tokenized. They gave people credits for cleaning up the garbage, and then all of a sudden it got cleaned up. Now I don't know the accuracy of like how that actually played out, but yeah, that's the idea. And I remember on the education thing, when I was a kid, I always struggled with math. And at one point, my mom put me into like a private tutoring company, but it was like in a kind of like a strip mall sort of setting. But that was the whole thing. They had you collected little tokens, kind of like at the amusement park. You collect the tickets, and then you can go up, to the front, and then like select from some shitty ass like plastic toy or whatever.
You always need way more tickets than you think you need to get anything.
Yeah. What's that movie with Steve Martin? Like he's like, you can have anything he's got this huge thing, and he's like, his things get smaller. You can basically you can have this with what you have there, but yeah, like think about that, like at the amusement park, and you've got to like collect your tokens, but it can be manipulated. Like that's why the game, the video game places that used to be quarters. But when they switched to tokens, I remember, like, oh, you can't figure out how much you're actually paying for a game. Because it's like,
that's interesting.
Because it was like, oh, it's 3 tokens. Okay, how much money is that? I don't even know. Okay, 3 tokens. So they got people to start paying more money for the games, because it was a psychological thing. Like they didn't really know like what they were doing. And so that's the thing of like, it's like all these things being further and further removed, like it's all these complex things where you don't really even know what the value of anything is, because it's all on these tokens.
Well, I will say too, like the Internet of Things thing is like, so I went camping last week, and the way to get across Pennsylvania is the turnpike, and it's the old Pennsylvania turnpike. And it goes through a couple of mountain ridges, the Alleghenies. So I like, we have an Easy Pass. Like I probably shouldn't have an Easy Pass, but we got it years ago, and I don't really drive that much on the, tolls, but I didn't really pay attention at how much it was, because now that you can't even get a ticket. Like it used to be you would pull up and get a ticket, but since the lockdowns, I guess they laid off all of the people at the toll booths. So it's all pay by plate, mail, something like that. Well, I realized once I got out there that it was like $28 to go from Philadelphia to like not even Pittsburgh, which is like a 4.5-hour drive, which seems kind of crazy, $28. So on the way back, I was going to try to like go further south on the non-toll road and then up, but it wouldn't, like the Google Maps wouldn't let me not get on the turnpike. I kept choosing not the turnpike way, and then it would direct me onto the turnpike. So you have this Easy Pass, you just got this little square thing that's like, you have no idea what you paid to drive on the turnpike.
Computer says like, no.
Computer says no. Like it kept picking it, and I'm like, and finally I gave up. I was just like, fine.
So you took the toll road?
Halfway, but I did save the other half. Like
you got part of it. Oh man.
Yeah, it's like that's the cybernetics though. Again, it's dissociation from what real money is, and then it's the sensor networks. It's all connected. So, but the other thing I wanted to mention, so this is kind of what spurred me to say, oh, we should do a quick talk about this. Is my blog post has, like, it's a little bit jarring. On the one side, it's like my lovely camping trip in nature. And then on the other side is I watched this terrible horror movie, which I don't like horror movies, but I had bought it a while ago because the guy who produced it, developed the film, I had researched him before. His name is Grent Furthner. I forget his first name, Grent Furthner. And he did an art project with Ian Grigg. And Ian Grigg is the guy who developed the Ricardian smart contracts, and now works for Materium, Vinay Gupta on Web3, smart contracting. Like back in 2007, Grigg and Grensfurthner and this other guy had developed a quote unquote art project that involved picking wildflowers, pressing them, laminating them, and then turning them into a community currency of beautiful money, right? So there's Ian Grigg in his more youthful days. His hair is a little bit longer than it is today. And then if you keep scrolling down, there's a picture, and we dissected that a little bit, the books on the table. And one of them was The Chaotic Age, which connected us to Dee Hock, the founder of Visa, and this idea of emergent behavior around order and chaos, that this next age was going to be order and chaos. So again, we're not dealing with total totalitarianism, because then you actually wouldn't get emergent behavior. You have to have some leeway within the gaming mechanics. And so Grensfurthner, can you just scroll along to see the movie poster? So that's him in his younger days. There's some wildflowers. The movie poster itself is pretty grim. There it is. So it features these, for people who are listening, a pair of ears that are shaped like a pelvic bone, and then a knife, like a very sharp hunting knife or something that's piercing, and it's called Masking Threshold. And it's about acoustics. It's about, I guess, otology, or like hearing. And so the premise is that there's a former physics student at the University of Central Florida, which is a center for aerospace and defense contracting, and is all involved in, photonics and like cutting edge nanotechnology. It has one of the top video game design programs in the country. All of these things, and he is doing frequency experiments with these like Chladni plates or something like that, and these vibration plates that you put a like salt or sand on, and they vibrate and make patterns. And he gets this hearing, this thing in his ear that ultimately they describe it as tinnitus, but it's not. And it sort of ruins his life. And so he's trying to figure out in this lab where this tone is originating from. And then ultimately, through experimentation that goes from inanimate objects to increasingly animate and like multicellular, sophisticated animals, from like plants to like mold, to plants, to mice and ants. The ants, yes. So the ants were there, and slugs, and then it gets more sophisticated and ultimately involves the neighbor's dog and the neighbor at the very end. It gets increasingly bloody as it goes along. But Jason, do you want to say what your impression was like after you watched it?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really care for the movie. I didn't really find anything enjoyable about it.
You're just like, this is a weird movie.
Yeah, it's a weird, and I actually like a lot of weird movies, but this particular one, I just didn't. There's definitely, the thing is, there's definitely a lot of stuff that was in there that ties in with a lot of stuff we've been talking about. I can't say that I got the point of the movie, like.
Well, your initial thing was like, oh, that makes that stuff look really bad. Right? Yeah, for sure. It would be like, oh, Alison and Jason are talking about that. Maybe they're crazy people, like, because this guy's obviously got mental health issues. That's an understatement. The whole filming of it. So it's interesting. It's kind of along the lines of found footage, or this idea that it's meant to look like this person's personal film project. So it's not real, but it's meant to look sort of amateur, and everything is very tightly close up. Like, in fact, there's one major character and then his victim, but you never actually see his whole face. And it is actually Grensfurthner. I didn't realize it till later. There's a voiceover that's the narrator. It's all narrated, but the close-ups of the body are actually Grensfurthner's body, but it's only in like teeth, hair, nose, different hand, different pieces, but not his whole body. It's hard to get any distance or context. And it's all set mostly in one room. Now, this room is highly curated, the objects in it, and but it was all done in Vienna. So again, this is the token engineering, cybernetics, tokens, atoms for peace, the Center for Token Engineering at Vienna University. And so it's interesting that that's where it was filmed, but he brought suitcases of things from Florida to represent this Florida man in Vienna as if it were in Florida. So that's certainly a lot of effort. And then ultimately the film premiered in Austin, which has its own sort of context, right, of Austin. But my takeaway, so, and actually Steffers, after she watched it as well, and we were talking about the vibration of the cells, because what he ultimately comes to the point is that there's a sound in the cells of the life force. And then when subject to violence, it changes and it gets more complex. And so that he becomes very isolated. He can't be with people because the cells of their body are making noise that's driving him bonkers. Well, it turns out that that's actually, I mean, cells do make noise. We don't hear it, but it's called sonocytology. And now that they have these force electron microscopes, they can actually get down to individual cells and the noise they make and the vibrations. And so within the film, there's a lot of stuff about pulse, about salt, which salt and
Pulse with the nightclub, the Florida nightclub.
Yeah, in Orlando. So this was all taking place in the greater Orlando area, which is the Center for Advanced Distributed Learning's Military Intelligence and Gaming is in Orlando, as well as a lot of virtual reality and aerospace and military stuff. Like, it's not just Disney Orlando, it's a lot of stuff. So he's in a suburb. It's about vibration, it's about sound, and it's about the vibration of life. And so, but it's a cellular system with a membrane that vibrates and the passage across that cell membrane. And so even though it seems totally disconnected from money, this idea of a community currency, like once you understand that cells are building blocks for tissues and organs and bodies and societies, it's a fractal. So you're drilling down into the cell mechanism for the membrane of the passage of something into the cell or out of the cell. But just as a cell exists, you could also have a cell that is a society, right? Like not a cell as in a prison cell, but a cell as in a freedom cell, something like that. An identifiable society with a boundary, a conceptual boundary where things go in and out. And so the physics of biology has an equivalency in the social physics of a society. And then within the society, there's a physics of economic exchange as a signal and as an expression of not just financial value of goods and services, but also ultimately they're moving towards morality, like a moral economy, a positive economy, a circular economy. And so there's a language to those signals that are happening within membranes that are layered, nested within one another in more and more complex fashions. And so I can see that Web3 with the programmable currency is not unlike the biochemistry of a body that's managing and orchestrating complex systems to maintain homeostasis. And then that homeostatic imperative is going to be applied at social scales, but in ways that are going to be really specific and granular, that we can't quite fully imagine what it might look like. Not just to make people miserable or make somebody a lot of money, but to actually come up with a computational program around it.
Yeah. Well, on the morality or the ethics, I mean, that was another theme in the movie, was just that this guy was like, didn't really view, like he didn't really have respect for life. I mean, in his pursuit of trying to figure this thing out was causing him to, do pretty unethical. But well, the movie, I don't give it violent. Yeah. So I mean, there was that aspect of it too, because on one hand you could say it's actually arguing against, But
people don't know that cell noise is a thing. People don't know that physicists are studying cell noise to understand what it means for possible disease, or that stem cells might be able to determine what they're supposed to become based on the noise signaling around them. That it's actually an actual science. And so my point, one of the points that I made was that, hey, this is the reviews of the film were generally positive, like for a horror film. But they generally framed the protagonist simply as someone who was broken, obsessed, a conspiracy theorist, someone who was not.
Not well.
And the behaviors were not normal or not well, But there was nothing that said, wow, you know what? Let's put this in the context of J.C.R. Licklider and the birth of the internet and his focus on human machine symbiosis. Because lichen was part of it. Like the character was
Right.
talking about lichen, right? Lichen is a fusion of two living organisms. Well, we're rapidly approaching a fusion of man-machine, which is something that was imagined by Licklider in the late 50s, early 60s. Like, and his training was in psychoacoustics. Literally, like his training, and it was unfolding in World War II in the military at Harvard was sound and acoustics and psychology. So if you layer in that plus the context of it happening in Orlando specifically, and then you if you spend some time and you look at the links that Steffer shared about, like, yes, actually there is a science of the noise of a cell, the language of a cell, and how the symphony of the cells working together are not being dysfunctional impacts life. Then you might reimagine that story as not just one twisted individual who became demented, but someone who possibly encountered a military experiment or became the subject of some sort of science that is in actuality a real science that has applications to life on the planet as we proceed towards human-machine symbiosis.
Right.
And that's like essentially all of the violence there would discount that. You would just write that off. And then moving forward, if someone saw the movie, any aspect of like, oh, life might have a tone. Living systems might have a frequency that's a tone that impacts our biology. You would just go, oh, that's crazy talk. That's just the things that what those psychotic people do.
Yeah. I'll say one thing too. Also, you mentioned the merging of the man and the machine sort of idea, and I think a lot of people are so transfixed on like implants or something, and I think a lot of people are so transfixed on like implants or something, and once you understand like just your use of smart technology being a phone or whatever, and also the use of tokens, that puts you inside the machine, and it doesn't have to even be integrated into your body. You can be living inside the machine without even like with still maintaining your biological integrity. So I think that's another thing. I mean, I know that's kind of a side note, but I just thought I would point that out. No,
that's important. Like the whole cyborg thing, it's sort of imagining you've signed up for Elon Musk's program or something like that.
Neurobrain or whatever, which they are doing those things. It's just, but if you're focused just on that, you're missing the bigger picture, because the fact of the matter is we already to a certain degree live inside a machine, and it's about to advance. It's advancing. Yeah.
Well, and I will just give a little sneak preview from the piece that Leo worked on, and I'm gonna, as soon as I get caught up, I'm gonna share it out on the blog. But it was a really good read, and it was talking about parametric insurance and predictive modeling, which are things that he's talked about in the past. But then, like the next phase, it was talking about linking grassroots economics, which is again one of these token. Will Ruddick, who came out of was all but dissertation at UC Boulder and worked at the Stanford Linear Particle Accelerator. And then, how does a guy like that go from the Stanford Linear Particle Accelerator to working on community currency in Switzerland and then bounce over to Africa and start implementing it, right? Like there's a connection there that has to do a lot with physics and managing, currency. But in disaster relief, tied to parametric insurance modeling, they had also done a program with epidemic modeling with supposedly what they called it like participatory surveillance, which means you surveil yourself, like you agree to surveil yourself. And so they were tokenizing health behaviors, meaning like that you would fill out surveys about how you were feeling. And then they would match your survey against government data and almost like de-identify it, and then make you an agent in the simulation and then feed it into the simulation modeling. And it was quite interesting because in the story, it was in Africa, and not everybody has their own phone in Africa. So then they would have to figure out, well, if people are sharing a phone, how do we know who's entering which data on the phone? So they would put in gamification elements into it to try to further de-identify and break out the information into the agent-based modeling. So, Leo's article that's going to be out soon, but it's talking about like the links between disaster preparedness, uh, participatory surveillance, like predictive analytics, and these token economies, and that they're all blended together. They're not really operating independently. You have to understand them as larger systems, socio-technical systems that are shaping how like whole groups of people in these pilot programs operate. Right. And yet for the most part, the vast majority of participants are probably simply participating without understanding the deeper purpose behind what their participation reveals to the overall machine system.
And you can even group, the individuals into other groups, and then those groups into other groups, and manage those groups differently as well. There's it's infinite.
The trusted compute cell one, the Kumu map. So at this point, I just wanted to mention John Clippinger and Alexander or Sandy Pentland are two key figures we've mentioned before over at MIT Media Lab. And, they're working in social physics and social design and digital identity, the ID3 program. And so early on, I remember seeing that they developed something called the Open Mustard Seed Platform. It was actually in 2013, which in like Web 3 years is pretty early. And so their digital identity program was framed as a trusted compute cell. And so you can see there's an image there that has sort of a wavy background. It's like a waggly kind of cell, but there's objects within it. And so this idea was that you could, you will have a digital identity, and then there would be trusted members of your circle that could participate with you in different online transactions. Now, this isn't specifically about money, but it is about these trust frameworks, and it is talking about sort of creating boundaries around digital societies, right? Digital groups, again, that can be nested within one another, and then membranes and crossing the membranes. And so, for me, that film Masking Threshold, and what a masking threshold is something in audiology. It's when you have two sounds that you can hear both sounds, and that eventually one sound overcomes the other, and then the other one disappears. And there's like a threshold at which that happens. And then the other sound, you can't really perceive it. It's there, but you can't perceive it anymore. And that's a masking threshold. And it kind of relates to white noise, which has a timeliness to it, because the Don DeLillo book, White Noise, that was turned into a Netflix film that just so happened, it was about a toxic airborne event from a train derailment, like happening right around the same time that one happened in East Palestine, Ohio.
The film was released at the same time that the thing happened, right? Like, so the film had been filmed already, and then all of a sudden the scenario that's in this major Netflix film happens in real time. And there's even a scene in there where there's like, there are these people, and he's like, is this a simulation? They're like, well, it was a simulation, but now it's real. And I was telling Alison, like, in a lot of these, like, big shooter events, or even on 9/11, there were all these simulations going on. And there's this weird overlap between real things happening on top of the simulation. I have my theories about that, but that's another episode.
Yeah. But anyway, I can't remember where I was going with all of that. But
well, you're talking about white noise.
The white noise. Yes, so that's the masking threshold, right? And so you've got, and I will say too, Jim Sorensen is one of the big people in the impact finance space, based out of Salt Lake City. And his background, actually, a lot of his money was made on video phones with closed captioning for deaf people. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of overlap in this space.
One Kurzweil.
Oh, yeah?
Kurzweil, he was doing synthesizers, but he also did a thing. He was making things for deaf. Deaf. That was his claim to fame.
Okay. Well, and I was talking with somebody today about, is it Vint Cerf?
Yeah, Vint Cerf.
Like Vint Cerf, yeah. And that he had some hearing impairment too. So there's this overlap between auditory and vibrational quality and membranes. And so you just pulled up here again, this is from this trusted compute cell with Clippinger and Pentland, communities. So you can form groups and contextual affinities, right? So that's But this is all happening in cyberspace. It's cyberspace tethered to the real world.
And if you can't see down here, there's like little people with their little smartphones.
Yeah,
that's what these
so
images are down here.
And then it's almost like flying saucer, you kind of like spinning things up there. But they have context, and then it says you can attach sensors in the real world and then act with users and to collectively manage shared resources and coordinate governance mechanisms. And so a lot of the stuff, Jason, you and I have been talking about for a while around cybernetics, right? And collectively manage shared resources. Well, that's kind of like a DAO, at that point, like the Web3 collective governance and cybernetics, that the governance mechanisms will be encoded into the Web3 layer.
And also real quick on this woman, Ashley Brooke Taylor, from a talk I was just watching earlier. She's with Resource, which is a community currency thing. But she was talking about NFTs, and she says NFTs are really for community ownership, the management of community ownership. So I can think of that as it relates to this as well, like the NFT, the role of the NFT in there in that management. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, whatever your popes, right? You can, if you have a proof of participation, then maybe you can exchange it for an NFT share in the community goods or whatever. But it's all digital; like none of it's going to be real.
Yeah.
So I just, I think to me, the understanding the money, like can't be, you're not going to have the full awareness if you don't see how it's going to be attached to managing social systems, individuals within social systems. And then also it's premised on the idea of cellular function and biology, and membranes and boundaries tie into the complexity, and the machine learning. It's all kind of glommed in there together.
Yeah. So talking about federation, the federating, because we're talking about how it's going to be an ecology, ecology of currencies. So that's why everybody's focused on, it's just the CBDC is not, they're not understanding what's being built, which is a network with a whole bunch of federation.
There's a couple of ways of thinking about the relationship of community currencies, especially in relation to perhaps a CBDC. So for example, a US digital dollar being a constellation of community currencies and local and regional currencies with a reserve that allows them to switch between them, that's in this US digital dollar or CBDC. So it's the idea of strengthening kind of regional economic development and allowing different regions to trade with each other. And their like community currencies can function as effectively as side chains, right? Because they're settling transactions locally, because it's the idea of also keeping transaction flows and wealth locally, and then being able to swap to other parts or other community currencies for trade. So that could be one way of thinking about, here's a future vision of what a federated digital currency looks like, a CBDC, and it will be federated amongst local and community currencies. And then to your point about the credit aspect, I think what could be really exciting is to have community currencies that are backed by local assets. So it could be locally produced wheat that is collateralizing the community currency from that region, or carbon credits that are generated from farms that are sequestering carbon in the soil. So it could be a variety of those different types of local productive assets, and to catalyze our community banks and credit unions that are in a part of me is like, I'm really worried about those financial institutions disappearing, because they've already been disappearing with market consolidation. We keep half of our deposits in the US with only 10 banks, even though we have 4,700 plus community banks and 5,000 plus credit unions. And so with the advent of technology, it could further displace these community financial institutions. Their strength isn't technology, it's relationship banking, which is actually quite valuable in being able to provide that last mile liquidity. So if we can engage those organizations to be able to issue local currencies, I think that could be really powerful in reinvigorating a very healthy and more decentralized community banking landscape.
So I thought that was useful. I mean, I think she kind of lays out like the constellation of it, the She's that her name is Fenny Wang, and she's with Humanity Cash.
Oh, that's Fenny Wang. She's with IXO.
Oh, is she? Okay. Yeah, so she's also okay.
Yeah.
I'll have to add that over
Can
here.
you pause that and like can you see if we can pull up a tab with her on it?
She's also with Humanity Cash, which is a Cello.
Wow.
It's a currency on Cello, and it says their mission is to create a circular economy powered by universal basic income and community currencies, which are local payment networks that ensure every dollar strengthens the local community. Okay, Fenny Wang. Okay.
Can you scroll down? Does it say IXO further down her? Head of strategy at Bancor.
Bancor.
Okay.
Maker DAO.
Can you show
Dionysus
13?
Labs.
I know she's with IXO. See all 13 experiences.
Oh, okay.
IXO, yeah, co-founder. IXO
Oh, she's
Foundation.
okay. So she's okay. That's,
yeah,
that's
this is big.
That's
this
a big deal.
That's a very big deal.
I just thought the way she described that was like, okay, that's actually more in line with what I'm thinking is going to be rolled out, which is
well, they would know, right?
Those, exactly. But those
they would know exactly.
And to have and the fact that money is, these tokens are going to, they're not just going to be tokens issued willy nilly. That they need them to be backed by real world assets. Or like they want them to be backed by real world assets. And then the exchange, that's why the cross-border payment discussion, whether it's through the central bank, CBDCs.
It could be regions,
or
right?
Hedera, Hedera. Like if they say cross-border, borders can be between Denver, Colorado and Westminster, Colorado or something,
Yeah, no, you can have
whatever.
infinite borders in Web3. That's the thing. And they can be in real time. You can put them up and take them down.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, so I thought that was
the interesting thing is like they're such good actors about like the whole like we're so concerned about our community banks. I mean, I co-founder of IXO, I don't think so. Like no, like you're supplanting what that is. And I don't know if you remember, but I mentioned a while back that when I was initially doing research into digital identity, that the early examples of digital identity were being piloted in the credit unions, which at the time I was still a little bit more immersed in like the polarizing politics stuff. And so I was like, well, that doesn't make sense from what I know about credit unions, right? But if you understand that the goal is cooperatism, the goal is these local, like guided local interactions. Although there's part of me that thinks when they're talking about community currencies, there's nothing to say that like participants in a DAO aren't a community, even if they're spread around the whole world.
True. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
your community doesn't have to be tied to
a geographic place.
Exactly.
She's implying that it is like the way she talked about it in that clip was implying like you're in a little town, and you guys are just supporting each other, right? Or the fiefdom of Philadelphia or whatever as a unit. But it isn't limited. And I think if anything, community is going to be more significantly along the lines of people affiliated around ideas and ideologies globally.
Right. We already see that, we see that forming right now. You have people that like live with each other, next to each other, that are on different planets.
Yeah.
She was also a research analysis for JP Morgan. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah. Can you, do you have up, could you Google IXO Foundation Smart Social Impact Bond and see if it comes up?
Smart what?
Social Impact Bond. Smart Impact Bond. Yeah. Well, and the thing is IXO is working with Zargam too. Yeah, there's Conway. So they're working on smart impact bonds. So you could imagine too, this idea of community currency and community banking, because this is again, one of these things. On the one hand, do you want to be against community banks? You want to be like, yeah, I want Citigroup,
Right. Yeah. You're given this choice. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, but I can totally see a community banking system being set up totally within the cybernetic framing of social impact finance, right? Well,
Right.
what do we want to we want to invest in the good of our people. Well, what does that look like? Well, that looks like Head Start programs, universal pre-K. Well, okay, well, what does that look like? Well, that looks like BlackRock buying us a whole bunch of surveillance play tables. Wait a minute, that's not what we meant, right? But it never goes to that next step. They're just operating on this very superficial level.
Yeah. When they talk
So-
about like mutual in this talk, they talked about mutual credit systems, which is something that I was really in support of when I first learned about them, because I was like, basically the money is created. The money is merely a representation of the value that we create. So like I make a video for you. Once that video is delivered, I now have a credit and you have a debit that then needs to be spent in the community. That idea makes total sense to me. Remove the steering, the data collection, the analytics, and all of that other stuff. Remove the impact finance element of it, because they even said it's a mutual credit system, but it's a circular economy. But within that economy, it's not just me delivering a service to you. It's there are these other players involved.
Yeah.
That have other motivations.
Right. Well, and then the idea that we're all peers, right? Like, are
Right.
you a peer with BlackRock?
Well, yeah, we're on equal.
we're not all
Me and BlackRock are like this, It's like we're like
we're not all equal peer. Like, are we peers with Whole Foods? Like we need
Yeah, yeah.
groceries, something. Like, we're not actually all peers. It's not like we're all running like cottage industries. We're not. I mean, like
True.
there are independent business people like yourself who do have it within your framework to offer goods and services on an individual level, but most of us are integrated into larger systems.
yeah.
Or not, but I hope to be eventually. But yeah, I mean, it's sticky, right? Like, then what does a peer-to-peer look like in that? It's hard to parse.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to me, and like where I was, 2 years ago was really focused on this, on IXO, on social impact bonds, on data collection, on data surveillance, right? Now, a lot of people have caught up to that part, but they haven't caught up to the part of like, okay, so it's not just making money and controlling people. The next layer of purpose is to orchestrate community through signaling towards some larger emergent behavior.
Yeah.
And it would be really great if we had the scoop on what that was, and we don't.
I
don't. But I can tell, like, you don't create 1,000-book edited handbook of human computation, and not have a plan for that, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I was just going back after looking at the whole cell systems and the vibrations at Stuart Hameroff's. I had a book of his that I put in. It was like biomolecular consciousness in nanotechnology, and it was from 1987. Like, I graduated high school in 1987. So I'm graduating high school, and Stuart Hameroff, the anesthesiologist who works with Roger Penrose on consciousness and microtubules, is penning this book on, biomolecular computing. And 10 years later is writing about the plans to use cell-based computing, biological cells, that microtubules, not just in your brain, but in the cells of your regular body, part of your body, repurposing those for computation. This was like in 1993.
Wow.
They're talking about the logic of
That's the year I graduated high school.
Oh, really? Okay. We got a book ended. So it's shocking, right? And like, if you try to have a conversation, even with people maybe who are, on paper have like higher levels of education or should be able to entertain this idea, they wouldn't be able to.
Yeah.
Because it would totally confound this idea of what they understand the world to be, right? Oh, wait a minute. There's some plan eventually to develop global computation within our biology.
Right. When I don't, and it doesn't.
Computation within our biology already. Like, we're computing our body. Our body is computing unto itself, but to integrate it into a network system, like, that's a whole new level. But it's something that's been in the background for 30 years.
Yeah. When also to the idea, like, it doesn't mean that those other things are completely going away either. Like, there are still going to be, these aspects of the system where people are just there to make profit. I mean, that's how they're steered, right? Like, even a CEO, you know, supposedly has all this power. They're there with a very specific purpose and goal, and I don't think that's going to just go away. I don't think that's just going to be this other system is going to just completely replace this other one. It's going to be kind of a hybrid, but it's going to have space for all sorts of different activity.
And the DAOs are going to be the structure for a lot of it, and a lot of it's going to be framed as mutualism and cooperativism and the antithesis of late stage capitalism. It's going to, like, especially for people on the liberal progressive left side.
Right.
I mean, I think both.
They're going to have something for the
libertarian. They're going to tell them that it's a freedom opportunity, and then they're going to tell the progressive liberal left, oh, these are the cooperatives that you've always been wanting, and they're going to sell both, and then ultimately we're all going to end up working for the machines.
Yeah.
Because the machines are going to hold most of the tokens.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, so I guess I wanted to point that out, that it's not going to be either or. I think it's going to be an integrated system where they're going to, because like I thought about that. I was like, there's so many conservative people that aren't going to go along with that aren't all about the community and all the stuff that people talk about in these other circles. And so, but what motivates them is I invest money and I want to make money. So that's where like the crypto side of things comes into play. You know, it's like there are these two things that are going on, which
but conservatives have their own kind of community. Like, and that's where I see like the churches fitting into this, and like very much the narratives, especially in the sort of resistance spaces of people of faith, you know, especially particularly Christian faith, lining up behind certain narratives, is because the leaders of a lot of those institutions are going to be framing like, okay, we'll have a token. We can have our megachurch token.
Yeah.
Like, and we'll support one another, right? We'll support ourselves and our own values in the face of XYZ threat from the government, from outside forces, from degeneracy, whatever. Like, the community still exists. I mean, you could have your, gun rights community, or you could have different ones. I'm not trying to be super stereotypical, but anything, you could create a community around it of like-minded people, which is why I'm saying I don't even think when Fannie Wang talks about community currency, initially you think, oh, small town, the bakery, that whatever, like that's what they want to trigger in your mind. But like more than likely, it's going to be a diffuse set of people who share a common interest around certain topics or certain financial interests that are organized in these decentralized autonomous organization structures, I think.
Real quick correction. I just looked over here. That video I showed was actually from April 7th, 2022. So it's from, actually from over a year ago. My bad.
But that's still fairly recent. Like, I mean, it's interesting. I didn't realize, maybe I forgot that she was at Humanity Cash, but,
yeah, I didn't know she was IXO. I missed it. I missed that when I watched that. So that was that.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't have known, but I knew her. I knew her back when. I knew Fannie when she was with Sean. When they were peddling their smart impact bonds.
you two go back, huh?
Digitally, only from watching digital profiles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so funny.
I know.
But well, yeah, I mean,
I think that helps people a little bit. Like, I'm not on, we're both mostly off of social media. So, I don't have the tone of everything, but I think a lot of it is still around these certain narratives around money. And even people who tiptoe around that it's not just about money. I think that there's going to be a temptation into like, oh, it's just a tool. It's how you use it. We could use it to make our cooperative utopia, right, or our populist utopia, libertarian utopia. We just could program it the right way. And what I'm saying is I think the end game is that we enter onto a game board of military psychological warfare. And on that game board, it's designed in such a way as to give us a certain amount of comfort and appeal. And then we will be given some tools to play there. And in the time that we play out on that game board, collectively, in whatever groups we self-identify with, we will be generating in this ubiquitous computing space sensor data to be used for simulation, prediction, risk modeling, financial shenanigans, potentially also collective biohybrid superintelligences. And we may not even be aware that we're actually doing it, which is, I think, the more unnerving part.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I'm in my process of trying to wrap my mind around this, and I think it'll help too. I would hate to say when when these things actually start to be implemented in the real world, because there's still kind of like a lot of these things are still in the building phase, and it's still in like the crypto phase, because even like Hedera, who's going to be a major layer one for a lot of these community currencies, and Swirled Labs, but Hedera has its coin, HBAR, and so people are like, all the videos I look out there, I've been trying to research a little bit about Hedera, and like so much of the stuff out there is just all about like, oh, what's the price of the coin? What's the price of the coin? And it's like this investor mindset, but it's a lot harder to find the information about like the actual like how this is actually going to work in the real world in terms of these coins once they do become functional as a medium of exchange.
Yeah. And we'll have to see if they do, like, I mean, how is it all going to hang together?
Yeah. Well, and again, that's one of the challenges with us being kind of so far ahead of the curve, or I should say, you especially, because you've helped get me up to speed on a lot of this stuff. But my background is definitely like lends itself to this with complementary currencies, and even the work that I've done with like ETH Denver and different groups, and just seeing how this is all taking shape is interesting. And then also the smart contract layer is another one, and I'm going to do a video here on the Chainlink's new smart contract layer. So interoperability for smart contracts coming soon. Well,
and I just want to mention too, one of the sections in Hameroff's book about biomolecular consciousness, he had a section on cellular automata, like John von Neumann from Princeton and his idea. And I mean, we're still sort of working through it, but I talked about this a little bit in the past, like these different ant computers. You've got like a graph, and within each is like a node, and then you have neighbors. So you have, one in the middle, and then would that be 8 around it? So you've got, like, if you picture like a grid of 3 by 3 squares, and in the middle you've got a node, and then it's surrounded by 8 other little squares. There's a state. Every square has a state, a program state, and it can shift, and it's attached to a timer, like a time click, of the time, and that can be adjusted depending on how long it is between. And the state of yours depends on that of your neighbors, and there's programming involved, and ultimately, like, there's different automata, like the way the programming happens, but eventually they get these like rockets and eagles and flying things, and it's simply mathematics happening on a grid, but it's this emergent behaviors that come out of the programming of the cellular automata or automatons or what have you. And the more I think about it, and even in the film Masking Threshold, when he first trapped the ants, that was his first like non-plant, I guess, animal, thing. And he built a trap for it by putting white sticky paper around in a square, like it left a green square of like a gridded, like a cutting mat board, like something that you use a rotary cutter on. But it was gridded, and that's where the ants were. They were operating in a grid, which I think is an allusion to the cellular automata. And then they couldn't get out of the grid because of the sticky tape that was around it. And that those ants, that is part of sort of the ant computer and this phase change. So I feel like, yeah, exactly. That's what it looked like. Now that's visually like it's almost like every frame of this film had some significance. Like it was a very small, dense area, and he built the set. I mean, I guess they build all sets, but in Vienna from things that were supposedly from Florida. So anyway, I'm looking at that, and that to me speaks to this phase shift change, and then the goal of getting emergent complex behaviors. So if you imagine the mesh of Web3 as some sort of decentralized smart contract net that you can program, you could start to gamify, I feel like, having more nuanced programming into the mesh of the cellular automata program.
Well, I was thinking
So
too
I
with
don't know exactly how that works, but to me it feels like a match.
well, you know, they say like our DNA includes all the information, like every strand of DNA has every, you know, bit of piece of it. You think about the blockchain, which is a copy of a copy of a copy. It's copies. It's like
Yeah.
it can supposedly contain all the information that you can build the whole thing from one you know, one thing. You can build the thing. And I know
Right.
there was some other
Well,
stuff that
that's
you would.
interesting because that's also kind of like a hologram, how a hologram works. Because there's this phase inference from two directions of like information and they cross over and then that it gets embedded on whatever the medium is.
Mhm.
But as I understand it, when you have a hologram, if you cut it up into small pieces, any one of those pieces has the whole image.
Yeah.
Like it's not just the middle of the image or the edge of the image, it's the entire thing is contained within it.
Right.
So
When just thinking
that's
about that in relation to, you know, that the statement about like what happens has everything to do with what your neighbors are doing. I'm just trying to see the connection there, you know.
Well, I feel like community, like they're identifying community now, and what I keep pointing out is like your neighbor isn't necessarily sharing a wall with you. You know, your
Yeah,
neighbor could be the person who is most recently logged into whatever the message board, whatever decentralized whatever program that you're using in this.
Well, even with you, like they were trying to put you into like that category of being, you know, what was it? The list, the COVID list.
Oh yeah, the team no virus, right? I'm going to put a
Team No-
hashtag on you, and I'm like, no, that I didn't agree to that. That's
I'm
not
not
me.
necessarily part of any group here. I'm just
Right. I'm just working independently.
got my own.
But it's
Yeah,
gonna be
exactly.
hard. It's gonna be hard to maintain your non-group affiliation because
Yeah,
I think
you
we
can't
can
be
see
independent.
really very strongly how the extent to which the psychological warfare programming has sought to put people into affiliation strongly, and it doesn't even really matter what they are, just that you are part of one.
Yeah.
That that whatever you're a part of becomes reinforced.
Yeah, and they need that for the computation anyways, because it's a lot of the computation has to do with like flattening out.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And because they don't.
Yeah.
But they don't even have the computing power. You know, they only have limited computing power. I think they would like to have it even be more refined, but they don't have the capacity to do that. So they're saying that's what it's all about. It's like, how do we, you know, I listened to an audio book on the creation of the MP3. I think it's called How Music Got Free. It's kind of an interesting book, but they were talking about the MP3 and like they discovered that like, yes, if you play a record, there's much more dynamic range between the highs and the lows, but you don't actually your ears will actually fill in the blanks. Like you don't necessarily need all that dynamic range. So like the MP3, the whole point of the MP3 was to narrowing that dynamic range, and they realized like, oh wow, it still sounds good, even though like if they were to look at it on a piece of paper, they're like, this shouldn't sound good, you know, comparing this to this.
Yeah.
But it worked.
But I think that's part of what the masking threshold is too. They're like, oh, there's all this extra information we don't actually need because you're not processing it. So we'll just get rid of that.
Right.
Compress it.
But also some of that extra information might be really, really relevant. It's just not relevant to what their purposes and goals are.
Right.
You know what I mean? It might be relevant to me.
Well, can you, do you still have the Kumu map, that the descent one, the tab? I think I see it, the third one over. Okay, so it's not Jamie Wheel, Jordan Hall. Yes, so you see Jordan Hall, who co-founded the Game B group, MP3 video compression.
Okay.
Backfeed DAO, Santa Fe Institute, Aspen Institute.
Is he on the?
So there we've got audio stuff again, and then his partner, I think, wife Vanessa. She's the futurist and the neuro hacking person. I think she's into this story. So to me, the signaling that's going to be happening with the community currency is the Game B. They're moving us into Game B. And, you know, and I've talked before about Eric Weinstein, you know, the mathematician. You know, his brother Brett is the evolutionary biologist, but Eric was the one who was talking about melding biophysics, social physics, and econophysics, economics, biology, and society all together.
Yeah.
And so we're moving towards the game B. And again, sort of the lead on that is Jim Rutt. And he was a trustee in Signals at Santa Fe Institute. And he was one of the lead funders behind Big Chain DB, which eventually sort of morphed into Ocean Protocol with Trent McConaughey. So these tokens and this idea of neurohacking, psychotechnology, this is something we're going to probably end up talking more about with this San Patrignano model, the recovery model. Like, I think they're going to be creating certain quote unquote communities. And I can totally imagine a community currency in some of those addiction places, right? Modeling good behaviors and, local accountability, community accountability to one another.
I'm wondering if there isn't something already there in San Patrignano. I always have a hard time saying that.
That's okay. I took Italian because I had a semester in Italy, but yeah. Nice. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, in these institutionalized settings, that's where the token economies came. Now, that was a pretty repressive, at least back in the day, program. Now they're trying to sort of polish it up, and RFK Jr. wants to sell it to people as the answer to, not just addiction, but, alienated youth and people with depression and anxiety. I send everybody to the Peace Corps rehab unit. But I think that those will likely be those kinds of institutions, templates for these quote unquote community-based interactions, and it will be framed as, charitable and sustainable and participatory, all of that.
Yeah. Well,
yep,
cool.
I thought George Hall was MP3.
Yeah, no, that was he might have been. I'm sure he was talked about like in this audio book that I listened to. It's been several years since I heard that, but I remember that story.
Well, and file compression of all kinds is really central to extended reality because it can't store everything.
Right.
And so, and that was really the focus. And University of Utah in Salt Lake City, their focus was on graphic design and file compression. So, that's what they need for extended reality. But there you go. Jim Rutt, money as a social signal, a variety of tokens for coordination. Yepers. So again, this is nothing totally new. I just wanted to kind of have a specific conversation about it because, the one last thing I wanted to mention, I did come to hear that some of these early conversations around community currencies, including with Leotair, happened in the context of the Institute of Noetic Sciences and this Edgar Mitchell, and that is sort of this consciousness study program. So if we're to understand this idea of cybernetic engineered collective consciousness towards computation, if that's accurate, what I understand is that it had its origins, at least initially, conversations in that context of ions in consciousness, then it would be very consistent, right? That these community currencies, in the short run and on the surface are meant to appear as a liberatory, answer to the problem of central banking and, centralized power, but in reality are the gateway to consciousness engineering. And this is like a long conversation. Jason, he's very nice to humor me to have it. Like, I know that this is really close to his heart, like this issue of money and property and, how its role in society. And so this isn't just the end all be all conversation. This is us processing because we don't have all the answers either. But sometimes it's important to reflect on our own personal experience and then what we know and figure out how to move forward with it, just to sort of stake out where we are now based on where we thought we were with the information we had before that's changed. And so I think I just want to encourage people to have that flexibility and to know that we're not trying to, point people out as nefarious actors who are operating that space in any way. We just want to say there was incomplete information. And now that we actually understand the terrain better, it really behooves all of us to immerse ourselves a little bit more in where it's going, not just the history of money, but applying what we understand of the history of money, understanding it as setting up the next solution. It's not going to be the same solution. It's going to be a new solution, and they want you to buy into it. And so anybody who wants to give you the hard sell on the new solution, like, you should be a little skeptical about what their motivations are.
Yeah, and also just what they're leaving out, or what even if they don't leave it out, they'll downplay it, because the story sounds good. If you listen to some of these talks, you're like, oh, that sounds really great. We're going to incentivize people to do the right thing. Like, what would be wrong with that? But the right thing based on whom? And you're setting up the system where, you're going to be literally living in a game, and they claim that it's going to be democratic or whatever. But I can show that that's actually not even true.
Yeah.
We'll keep this conversation going. And like I said, I'm still in the process. I'm still in my own process with all this, but definitely the story is not just CBDCs.
No, it's the biophysics and economics and social physics. Like, to me, if we start using that lens when they hear something, and realize that the goal is actually to get you to participate in the collective tokenized behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's something that undergirds that is needed. Our participation, our creativity, our soulfulness, our relationships, our story is needed in that space.
Yeah.
So they're going to make it attractive for us to enter. It's not going to simply be a punitive measure. There's going to be carrots and sticks.
Right. Yeah. Well, good. Yeah. Thanks,
All right,
Alison.
Jason.
Yeah. We'll keep the conversation going. And here we are, keeping the conversation going.
Keep going.
Hello. Let me just check my audio. Sounds good. So there was one thing I actually messed up on that video, and I didn't show it. But when Alison was talking about the ant thing, so I thought I would just share that real quick. This is the image from the film with the ants, where he blocked off the ants into these little squares. So. My bad.
It's interesting too, because it's almost like 4 of those 9 square cells. I think it went off the side, but it's kind of tidy. Like, it's not random. It's like a line, like we were talking about a center cell and then 8 around. There's 4 of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It almost looks like it's right in the middle. So yeah.
So anyway, we're here to, if you guys do want to ask any questions, we have more content. Alison, of course, is last minute, like, oh, here, I just found this. I found this. I'm like, all right, we'll put that in.
Jason's very accommodating. Well, several people have sent me things. Actually, this morning, somebody that goes by Persepolis 22 in my comments, Jason, you pulled a short clip about community banking or something as a teaser. I didn't realize what it was. I thought it was the placeholder for tonight. But it was actually a 30-second clip.
Oh, yeah.
And so she had commented on it, and it was asking some good questions, and sort of we were engaged, and mentioned a talk with Bruce Pon, who, along with Trent McConaughey, is the co-founder of Ocean Protocol. And so I ended up later in the afternoon going back and watching this talk, which was from about a month ago, just on a minor podcast. But they were right. The Persepolis 22 person was very right, that there was some good content in there. So and I always love to be able to clip things that's their own words, right? I'm like, I'm not making this up. This is just you saying this. So I pulled about 4 clips out of that had a lot to do with essentially this idea of blockchain intellectual property as our future of work income stream through micropayments and behavioral programming, and sort of, he calls it bottom-up UBI. And it was interesting to listen to him, how they were setting up the introduction of ChatGPT as the need for everything to be blockchained because of deep fakes. You wouldn't know what to trust. And so moving forward, every bit of information in the world needs to be put on blockchain to save us from deep fakes. And so it was interesting to see this narrative. And so looking at that, I was thinking, Bruce Pon, I think Trent McConaughey is based in Berlin, but Bruce Pon is actually based in Romania. And, that's I mean, there's a lot of very smart computer tech savvy people in Romania, but I had seen a podcast before where Bruce Pond was saying actually the majority of the staff for Ocean Protocol are based out of Romania. And it occurred to me at that point, I'm like, well, that's an interesting choice, right? Like I could totally see Berlin. There's a lot of stuff based there in Berlin or some other places, but Romania, it seems like an interesting choice. And like, what do I know about Romania? Well, the most prominent person in the complexity space that I know has ties to Romania is Michaela Uliaru, who has been in Canada for a long time, but is originally from Romania and trained in robotics and AI and automation and all these things in Germany, and then went on to Canada. And she wrote a chapter in From Bitcoin to Burning Man, John Clippenger's edited book, on holons and the development of holons. So I got to thinking like it would be interesting to revisit the map that I made with Trent McConaughey and Ocean Protocol that was sort of linking the noosphere and token engineering and game mechanics and self-actualization. And just, I've talked about this in different videos, but every time I get a new lens, it's like, okay, let's go, revisit and see if we have some more clarity now that we understand. Perhaps the ocean of Ocean Protocol is the ocean of like the collective unconscious, right? That's intentionally being interlaced with the protocol layer and the Internet of Everything to create opportunities for this biohybrid supercomputing. And I we're going to talk about this in another follow-up, but I think increasingly that the addiction recovery impact markets that are being set up linked to psychedelics and the use of wearables or remote bodily monitoring of brainwave function might be related to sort of like steering large numbers of people into, a subconscious state to access something, some sort of embodied information that they're seeking. So I don't know, like, should we maybe start with the map, Ocean Protocol map?
And real quick,
first?
I just want to say one thing before we jump onto the map. Someone asked about any progress on the FedNow CBDC. Just for clarity, FedNow is not a CBDC. It's actually, it's still the same money that we use now. It's just a different way. It's a faster way to transfer the money, but it's not actually a different, it's not, FedNow is not the CBDC, but the CBDCs are coming. But one of the things that we're trying to talk about is that, all the focus on the CBDC is distracting away from what's really going to be this larger ecology of money, and the CBDCs are going to play their role. There's going to be a function, but to solely focus on the central banks and the CBDCs is kind of missing this huge thing that's being built that's going to be managed. It's going to be regulated and managed through the CBDCs, I think, and we're trying to figure this out. But
if people are listening to Fenny Wang in the clip that we played from IXO, like she is very high level. This Humanity Cash, IXO Foundation, Bancor. Now here she is going on and on and on about how much she cares about community banking. Well, she's essentially a representative of this larger institutional network. So we need to understand that they are nested systems. And so like the ultimate umbrella for all of it may be the BIS ultimate ledger, right? Like, and that would be understood as the homeostatic control system. Irvin Laszlo has been talking for a long time about a world homeostat. So using the electrical grid at that level, but that's many levels above what your average worker is going to encounter. Like they may be, and we have to understand it's always problem, reaction, solution. So if they can make you afraid of the central and frame it as just that, then they're going to hand you a programmable local currency framed as some sort of populist libertarian freedom coin, and you're going to scoop it up and think that it's the answer, right?
Right. This is ours.
Right, exactly.
Not theirs.
And
this isn't the central bank version.
So like once you scoop that up and you don't understand the game you're in, you're on their game board. And so, like 5 or 6 levels up, it may be the BIS, but you're going to be so distracted by whatever's happening to you locally, the average person isn't going to notice that they're being controlled.
Yeah. And I'm working on trying to map out how this is going to look because we don't really have all that information just yet. I mean, the CBDCs are coming and they are going to play a role. There's this idea of a unified ledger, and I think that they're going to, cross cross border, but as we spoke, borders don't necessarily have to be a physical border.
Right.
They
I mean,
can
she
be
was talking
digital.
about federated. And then
Yeah.
even if you think, like, my main thing isn't Agenda 21, but this idea of regionalism, right? I mean, that's sort of an overlay. These, they have the maps of, the megalopolis and the different areas that are like pushed towards regional planning. Like, those could be community currencies, like within federated regions. Or you could just have a federated region of digital community that is nowhere contiguous to any normal geography. So there's a lot of different ways. Borders and these border settlements and everything, like the settlement of payments across borders, can happen at many different levels, like infinite numbers of borders, infinite numbers of settlement systems within a smart contract layer, protocol layer. And so we have to kind of get to that point. But for me, I would just say, the very fact that if people are waiting around in all of the influencer narratives that are out there framed as the resistance, how is it that programmable money other than CBDCs isn't having a critical lens applied to that, right? Like, how is it that it's gone forward so far and that there are a very small number of voices saying, wait a minute, actually, I think that this is the answer they want us to pick up because it's what they want us to do. And the very fact that there isn't a more lively discussion in the resistance, that there's not a more variety of conversations being had, to me indicates that there is a mimetic warfare going on that's holding people in a certain pattern so that they can't actually articulate anything beyond the narratives that are allowed to be discussed.
Exactly. Yeah. So I'm not saying don't talk about CBDCs, but put it into the context of the larger system that's being built. Okay. So we can jump to your map. And I've got it up here. I think this is the one here, Ocean Protocol.
Cool. Is there a way to is this a screenshot or can you zoom in?
This is I can zoom in. Let me bring up my cursor here so you can see. Okay. So if there's something, here's Ocean Protocol.
Okay. So there's Trent. Okay, so Trent McConaughey, so he's Canadian, right? I think he might be working out of Germany now, but originally Canadian. And Michaela Uluru, who was originally Romanian, like she had done a lot of her work in Canada. And actually, do we have it that we can bot back and forth? Like, could we look at Uluru's economic forum?
I have this, this one here.
Okay, well, this says that she's Romanian, and
I have this one as well.
There we go. Can we zoom in just a little bit so I can read it better?
Oh,
or do you want to read it?
I'll have to read it because I don't have a Zoom capability.
Okay,
this is
so
just my
can you
browser.
just read the part about her being in Canada? So this is her World Economic Forum bio. Not that that's the be-all, end-all, but it says she was the Canada Research Chair in Adaptive
Information Infrastructure
for
the E-Society, which she held for 5 years since July 2005. In 2007, she was appointed to the Science, Technology, and Innovation Council for Canada by the Minister of Industry to advise the government and provide foresight into the innovation issues related to ICT impact on Canada's economic development and social well-being against the international standards of excellence. Should I go on? She did some stuff in Singapore.
So Singapore, Romania.
Ottawa.
So again, she's made it around, but she's very well ensconced in Canada. And again, that's where Trent McConaughey has, is based. And so where he got his training. So I would think if she was this active in that complexity space, that their spheres would have overlapped significantly. And and then their company just ends up being situated in Romania. And then could we look at the Bitcoin to Burning Man table of contents?
This I can. I think I can zoom in on this one here. Boom. Oh, wait, maybe not. That's a search function. Hold on. Maybe I can't zoom in.
Is it at the bottom?
Here we go.
Okay. So this is from Bitcoin to Burning Man. It was a book that was edited, put together by John Clippinger of MIT Media Lab. Oh, I just want the table of contents. Yeah, you got the cover.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Yep.
Bitcoin to Burning Man and beyond. And so there are chapters from a lot of different authors. And the first section is just kind of an overview, but I'll read a couple that I think stand out to me. Okay, so social physics and the human-centric society. So again, that's Sandy Pentland of MIT Media Lab. He works closely with Clippinger. And so we need to understand social physics, and that I think really community currencies could be understood as demonstrations of social physics. The physical transactions, the relationality made visible to the machine. And then I'm just going to, chapter 6 in the second part is called the Internet of Money, right? So that would be programmable currency. I can't remember the date of this book. 2014. Okay. So they're envisioning an Internet of Money. Then there we've got Bernard Lietaer. Okay. So this is why we need complementary currencies. And then you've got, the Africa digital identity. That's Ledgard. He was the one who wanted to give wallets to the giraffes. And green coins, how we need green coins to build power. So that's the corporate environmentalism. And then there's Ulyaru in chapter 11 that says organic, again, because all of this stuff is biohybrid and bio-inspired design, right? The future of computing is not going to look like screens and LCDs and metal boxes. It's going to look like biology, okay? And so this organic governance, think cybernetics, right? Through the logic of holonic systems. And holons are essentially cells, like units, fractal units, circular units, that are independent of one another and decentralized. So that's really important to understand the logic of holons, especially in what I was saying about the masking threshold and the sound of the cell and the noise and the electromagnetism, and how that relates to computing. And then the next one is with Jeremy Pitt, who I talk about often. He's an expert in those socio-technical cyber-physical systems. And he's talking about algorithmic governance of common pool resources. And so I just want to emphasize that the commons and commoning and mutualism and solidarity, things that are meant to appeal more to people on the left, the commons is the game board. The game board is the protocol layer. That we are not in charge of. If we're given the ability to be in charge of it, it's some small minor part of it, not the structure of the game board itself. And then it just open mustard seed is the digital ID. So when Bruce Pons, Trent McConaughey's a colleague, talks about the need for digital ID, they've been working on that. That's John Clippinger's area. And then the relational matrix, the free and emergent organization of digital groups. And that's where we've got the complexity. And I have a clip from Ulyaru talking about that. So again, we've got the matrix, we've got the logic, we've got the tokens, we have the community. It's really once you have the framing of what is actually happening, it all starts to get very clear. And I've read these table of contents several times, but it's only now for me understanding if we become manipulatives, embodied intelligences that are being steered or used by perhaps some system that is disembodied, right? Or doesn't have an actionable system that's equivalency to a human body, a human soul, that we are collectively being organized towards some sort of computational program. And it's gamified. There's game mechanics. And I would say at the end of the day, they're going to structure it so that we want to play largely. And yes, we may be compelled to play some of it, but I think the authoritarian, totalitarian framing that is largely the core of the narrative right now around social credit and everything, if you only follow that, you're going to be missing all the stuff that we're talking about. So can we just go back to Trent?
Yeah.
The map. Okay. And maybe zoom in just a bit. So we've got Trent. He came up in Canada where Ulyaru was doing her thing, getting everybody situated with complexity there. He co-founded Ocean Protocol, but before that, he was working on a big chain DB with Jim Brutt, and we'll mention that again. But that's the Game B guy. And if you could just move up a little bit. So he's talking about this idea that through tokenomics, through token engineering, and you can probably click those 3 dots, Jason, on the left in the sidebar and make it go away. If you go to the middle of the sidebar on the edge, middle edge,
okay.
Other side, The
Right
nope, the sidebar, go to the left sidebar
here?
and go down to on the right edge to the middle, and you'll see 3 tiny gray dots.
Oh, wow. I'm
Nope.
not seeing them. Up here?
It's just
Nope.
below example. If you see example to the right of it in the red line, it's just a little bit down and to the left.
Okay. Yeah, I'm totally not seeing that. Oh, wait.
I'm just
That
trying to
legend.
make
There
it
we
bold.
go.
There you go. All right.
It
It's
said
kind of small. Yeah.
the
it's
legend.
very
My bad.
small.
Sorry about that.
We don't really need to look at the sidebar. I don't have a lot.
Yeah,
to
it's
do in the
it's
sidebar.
taking up a lot of
A lot of real estate.
real estate.
So Trent is talking about token economies, right? That's how they're going to program the protocol layer, right? And automate it, right? It's going to be automated, and that's what Michael Zargham and Block Science, they all, in the Common Stack and Griff Green, they're all about that. They're going to pair that with evolutionary algorithms, so that whatever they're engineering towards, they're going to reinforce circuits and connections that get them to whatever the optimization metric is that they're trying to achieve. And that so they're going to direct resources into the ones that have successful outcomes and prune unsuccessful outcomes. And that's these fitness, the fitness layers. It's all going to be framed as peer-to-peer, right? It's going to be super, it's going to be open. It's going to be peer-to-peer. But at the same time, you've agreed to be part of a fitness landscape, right? And be pruned or reinforced depending on something that we don't actually understand.
With your AI fitness coach.
Exactly, AI fitness coach, yeah. And so the other piece of this is that he actually talks about it as self-actualization, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you can become the best you that you are meant to be by participating in token games. And if you switch it up a little bit more, like pull Trent down a little bit. Yeah, a little bit. So they were talking about like these public utilities. And this is the public goods, the digital public goods, a little bit more up to that, like the next dot. These digital public good projects that'll be part of your circular economy, solidarity economy, aligned to the UN SDGs and the ESGs, that there will be tokens, right? And that maybe you will get to vote. This is where the voting and the democracy reboot comes in. You will throw your tokens around to projects that have Bitcoin addresses, and then there will be dynamic maps, and it will be connected to this game foundation, like game mechanics aspects of that. And McConaughey talks about this game of civilization that I think actually Joseph Gonzalez used to mention, that you start off from a base level civilization and then you just keep going up into more and more complex into like space empire or something like that. And so that's sort of the model that he's looking at through the gaming and the token engineering. You move in that direction. And of course it's linked to the UN SDGs. And now can we pull it over to the right a little bit so we go towards those gray dots the other way?
Oh.
Yeah. So I just want to mention this overlaps with this idea of the Gaia hypothesis. And I think this Gaia hypothesis with Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock of the Earth being its own superorganism, that's the super intelligence that is the protocol layer, right? I don't think we imagine that, like, if we thought that was something that was going to be nice, that it would happen with defense finance infrastructure, right? But this Gaia hypothesis of a self-regulating total Earth system with interplanetary files and coins and organized by our health strategies and our sustainable development goals. But I think that's where it's going, like into the noosphere. And it's going to be framed as commoning. So can you drag it a little bit more, pull it to the right, pull the right over a little bit all the way to noosphere? So I talked about this before, but in the yellow dot, Rand Noopolitique, the Rand was doing a whole document around statecraft in the noosphere, right? The emergence of Noopolitique and this global thought form, right? And that's coming out of Talhar Desjardins. And I would say if you haven't had a chance, there's 3 new guest posts up this week. One from Quantum Heart Cafe, which is excellent on the emergent behavior we're talking about. The second one is Lorraine Davison, and hers is a follow-up on Talhar Desjardins and Julian Huxley, linking it sort of the historic roots to 17th century dissenting religious dissenters in England, including the Quakers. And that's sort of has the no politique. And then the one I put up today is with Leo with parametric insurance. But they know, like, this is the high level military think tank is RAND, and that they're moving into the cognitive warfare domain. And it is about the noosphere. And it's being framed. If we can pull it so that the yellow dot is a little bit higher up towards the top edge, this idea of the Anthropocene, right? Bad people, keep pulling it up a little bit more. The narrative, like that we are moving towards panpsychism, this links in with a lot of the new agey aspect, the Greta stuff, the whole earth, that we are doing this for the goodness of our evolutionary prospects. That's sort of where it's all going. But again, who's doing it? RAND, right? The people who were setting up the internet for biohybrid design. So, I guess this sort of wraps up the scope for Trent, but I just want to emphasize on Ocean Protocol, they're looking at self-actualization. And actually, can we go over to the far right edge of Trent McConaughey's about the Mars stuff? You keep pulling left now. Yeah, and zoom in a little bit, that far edge in black. Yeah, so he's talking about, like, how would we go into space? How would we colonize Mars? How would we reshape the cosmos and bend it to our will, right? What we would need to do is actually blockchain our minds and come up with some sort of augmented reality telepathy. Like human biology is an insufficient substrate for these ambitions, these imperial ambitions that we have to conquer space and bend the universe to our will. So we need to invite people into living an extended reality experience that could lead them to put their consciousness in a different substrate. And then I would say once the consciousness is in a different substrate, you can start to do these mind melds. You can start to do these things. I would just say Whitney Webb on the currency, she's not in our story. So if you're thinking that that's the story, we're in two totally different stories there, just to clear the off the rails person. Very different stories that we're dealing with. Yeah, she's not talking about any of this stuff. That the moving to a different substrate of consciousness is towards the biohybrid computation. So I wanted to say that because to me, this fits in with the community currencies. The community currencies are the core of the token engineering in the protocol layer. And it's towards the collective. And it's towards the collective of the collective nature of the narratives around the climate and the ESG and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Those are the cybernetic parameters, the digital governance that we're going to be inhabiting in this game.
Right.
So I'm going to take a break, Jason, if you want to say a few things.
Well, and like I said, it's not just government. It's like that's this whole narrative that's out there in the space. It's like the governments are going to do this, and it's like, well, the definition of government is about to change like radically. Yeah. The government as it exists today is not what governance is going to be in the future. Your government is going to be literally on your phone, and it's not going to simply be the DIA app, which we've talked about. I did a whole thing about the digital transformation in Ukraine, but it's going to be an ecology and a network of a lot of private, and people are going to celebrate, these are private tokens or whatever. They're still going to be connected to, I think, the CBDCs and different government agencies. There's going to be it's not going to be an either or, but that's the problem with people with this binary thinking. It's like, it's either this or this. It's either this. And it's actually, so what we're trying to say here is, there's going to be like, look at this dang, like Allison's been busy. So class, I want you to study this map. Yeah, pretty insane.
My extended brain, it's my distributed cognition.
Yeah. Anyway, so
we continue to refine things. So, like, do you see the little at the bottom, like the two orange dots in the yellow and the black, like that one? So this is kind of interesting. If you could go over to the blue, this guy, the nooscope, the tool of global awareness. This guy, Anton Eduardovich, out of Russia, but like he was working on this idea of, again, the noosphere linking the sensing and the computing. And so, like, you have to be flexible enough to continue to build your understanding. And so, I would say a year, 18 months ago, my focus was primarily at the beginning of the pandemic on the finance side and on the speculative finance tied to the tokens. But really, over the past 6 to 8 months, it's been increasingly on the biohybrid computation. And again, this is like, in conjunction with work of other colleagues, including Stuffers, looking at how the nanotechnology aspect is going in the frequency and the physics, because you've got social physics and then you have biophysics, and then you have the nano electrical machines and microelectrical machines and ubiquitous sensing, that this is all coming together. So you actually, like, what is it? I kind of mentioned it before. Why are they doing this? Is it to make a lot of money? Some money. Is it about power? Yes, some power, but that's not it. Like, the end game is to guide the evolution into a collective consciousness for some purpose. Now, no one has told me, like, this is the computing list for embodied spiritual sacred intelligence on the planet, and this is what we'd like to get done, and this is who we are. I don't know what that is, but every indication seems to be that is ultimately, once you start looking at Jung, because Jung is in this map, and then you've got Jimmy Dore and RFK Jr. all about Jung and spiritual readjustment for your addiction recovery. Like, and the Templeton Foundation has been working on spiritual capital and the role of religion. There is a spiritual component. Like, I do believe that there is, again, I'm always very a bit cautious about religious faith-based institutions, because I know that they're central to the impact finance side of things. But I think inherent spirituality and souls of people are key. They wouldn't be calling these things soul-bound tokens. Like, the newest thing after NFT wouldn't be called soul-bound tokens if it didn't matter. So this does matter. So I think I'm kind of done with that. Do you want to, could we run the video with the Internet of Everything?
Sure. And I want to say one more thing that kind of ties to this, because people brought up Whitney Webb and some other people. And one of the frustrations I've had with one of the thoughts I've had about, like, a lot of the conversations that happen in the pop influencers and the resistance media is there's a lot coming out about, like, the CIA and all that and different things. And I have a theory that, like, they basically are using that as a leverage. We're going to expose all the wrongs for all the system as it's been right now, in order to use that as a selling point for the new system. And so if we're not talking about this new system that's coming online in detail, not in some just broad generic, oh, it's CBDCs or whatever, but, like, actually really understanding it. So my whole thing about, like, I can't think of the guy's name, but a friend of mine sent an article out recently too about one of the vaccine, resistor guys. What's his name, Allison? The guy that's
Malone?
friends with everybody in the CD. Yeah, Malone. Thank you. So he put out some article, and my friend was all excited about this article. And I'm like, well, first of all, the guy is, like, totally establishment, has always been establishment. And, but he was telling these truths that he thought were shocking about the CIA and the history of the CIA, even though the guy brags about all his friends that are in the CIA, and that he's just been establishment all the way along. But he's just shocked, and but now he's revealing this information that, like, any of us who've been in this space, none of this is new information to us. So it's like they already know that information is out there. But what they're going to do is to say, look how bad these things were. Look how bad the government is. Look how bad the CIA. And they're right. Those things were all terrible. I've been railing against them for years. But if we're not realizing that they already have a new game, there's a new game board, and that this is all just to herd us into the new game board. So if we're going to, like, fight the central bank money with our tokenized currency that's going to be part of this system, that's a problem. So I just wanted to get that off my chest.
Well, and I would just say, if at some point, like the Whitney Webb, Cory Morningstar, Last American Vagabond, like, these people want to do some sort of deep dive into Michael Zargham and block science and Web3 and what the impacts are for cybernetics and social engineering and all of that, like, more power to them. I'd love to see that. If that comes out, please, someone, like, pass it along, because I'm not tapped into, watching all of those things these days. But, like, I'm not saying that we want to have a lock on the space of talking about this, but
right.
For the most part, there's a very small number of voices who are unpacking this particular part of things.
Yeah.
And for the most part, they're telling particular stories that are capture people's attention, capture people's emotion, make people feel like they're belonging. Because, again, it's almost like the water cooler back when people used to watch, when TV wasn't on demand and you'd watch a TV show and then the next day everyone would go like, oh, what happened on ER? So, like, there was this communal, like, oh, did you read the article? I read the article, but, and it's hard because the vast majority of that is distracting from this. And I mean, I would be, if somebody wants to make a case in point why the Web3 protocol layer is somehow irrelevant, I'd be interested in hearing that, like why you think it would be irrelevant other than like, oh, they can't do it or something like that. Like, because clearly it's happening. Then we should be all talking about it, like at least incorporating it into the analysis. So,
well, and that was my thing. I was trying to bring together from the very beginning when I was doing If We Were Honest, I was oh cool, we got Corey, and I was going to do a show with Alison and Corey and Whitney, and that kind of fell through. But I was like trying to pull together like a team of people who were just looking at this stuff. But then like, new information would be presented. And a lot of these people wouldn't incorporate that new information into their discussions, and they're still talking about the CIA from 10 years ago or 20, which is, I still think it's important to look at those things. But I'm just saying, like, there's this thing that's happening right now that we need to be studying it like judiciously. And it's not happening. Like, I'm still stunned that Alison, it's just you, I, and a few other people that are actually like looking at this. And it's
like
not
Catherine
saying,
Austin-Fitts, where's she? Oh, she's promoting community banks. Oh, she doesn't know about Web3? Well, I've talked to her about it, right? Like John Titus, he's all central banking. Like, it's not bubbling up yet. Now, why is that? It's not because that somehow we're super smart and we know, more things, or we have more capacity. It's something else. It's something else that's happening.
Yeah, and I'm not, like I'm struggling with this, like trying to figure all this stuff out, but I can't ignore it. Like, I keep saying, like, Alison would bring something to me. I was like, oh shoot, yeah, that's an actual thing. That's actually really important. And the fact that I've been working in a lot of these spaces too, it clicked. It was easier for me to see because I was actually working in those spaces. But yeah, I'm just hoping. I'm still hoping that we get more people that. I mean, I told Alison, I was like, at a certain point, people are going to be like living this stuff, and I think at that point maybe they'll come back and revisit all this stuff.
But see, my concern is that they will have told a nice story that will get everybody going along. Because for me, I was against blockchain from day one because I knew that the use case I saw was putting preschoolers on blockchain in South Africa so they could earn social capital, right, for these speculative financial deals. I knew that in my being. I wasn't trading crypto in my basement, right? And so I would go up against the John Bushes and all of these people early on and say, like, no, this is where it's going. This is not good. This isn't your tool. And they insisted. And so, at this point, I would say, the vast majority of people who are making some sort of money on digital media are connected to blockchain, whether their stuff is hosted on blockchain or they're accepting crypto. So none of those people are going to look at this. They're just not. The reality is that they're not going to question as something that's buttering their own bread. They're not. And so, but then how is it that everybody's like captured by these platforms that are never going to tell you the core piece of what you need to know to navigate what's coming? It's, Anyway, well, before we do the Internet of Everything, can you go to the game B and just revisit? I'll just revisit that one, the map.
Sure. Is that the descent? Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe can we click the sidebar again, the little three dots?
Get rid of this.
Yeah, look at you. Okay. So
I'm a fast learner.
You're awesome. Well, it's hard to see. I had a hard time seeing it.
Yeah, the color was light and so okay.
Yeah. So you've got game B. So that's the game, right? That's the protocol layer game. You've got Jim Rutt just above game B, and he was MIT cognitive science trustee at Santa Fe Institute. A lot of this is coming out of Santa Fe Institute, interested in evolutionary AI and blockchain, right? And the money as a signal, as a social signal. So the game B, which was about self-organizing systems, was co-founded with Jordan Hall, and we mentioned him before. He was involved in file compression software and DAOs and Santa Fe Institute. His wife, Vanessa Hall, was involved in storytelling. She was a futurist in storytelling and neurohacking, right? And they're both connected to the Neurohacker Collective. And so that's a lot of what this guy, Daniel Schmachtenberger, is a part of, the social philosopher, cognitive intelligence. And he actually grew up as part of a consciousness community in Iowa, this Maharishi community in Iowa that had left from Goleta, California, and relocated in the 60s or 70s to Iowa. So he and his brother were homeschooled, and so now they're pushing consciousness engineering. And through that, it's neurohacking and this idea of meta psychotechnology. And Jordan Hall is really interested in what they call civiums and proto-B, which are like community solving things. And so I can see that a lot of this futarchy, the changes to digital democracy, the gamification of democracy with tokens, I think that is all related to the communal mind. The communal computation is using socio-technical cyber-physical systems to do voting and participation. And Leo's article that I posted today has a really interesting assessment of Matiga Solutions. They're involved in parametric insurance modeling, but then they were also involved in token economies tied to epidemiology, and that people were supposed to be incentivized to fill out health data with gamification in order to earn tokens for spending in local communities. So all of this stuff, the voting, the money, the thinking, the intellectual property on blockchain, which is essentially putting your consciousness onto blockchain, is all built into this gaming environment. And, I will point out that one of the promoters of this is Eric Weinstein. And then he's brothers with Brett Weinstein. So Eric Weinstein is the mathematician who worked for Thiel Capital, Peter Thiel Palantir. And then you've got Brett, who's a little bit off to the left of Eric, is the evolutionary biologist. And I'll have a clip from here. And of course, they're always this is the Joe Rogan, posse that they're always on there promoting all of their stuff. And Jordan Peterson is in that crew too. So once you understand it as a game of complexity, of biohybrid computing that involves neurohacking, democracy, and story, right? And doing it collectively in a tokenized commons. And actually on this somewhere, I think a little bit, the orange dot near the top, he had this makerspace in Stanton. Oh, the Emancipation Party. Yeah, he was operating out of Stanton, and I don't think I have it. Oh, the brown one. The Stanton makerspace. He had guild organizing. So I think Quantum Heart Cafe was mentioning guilds. Literally the language of guilds is baked into the system there with the holons. So I think the guilds are like holograph, like the holons, not holographs.
Well, I think about like the Gilded Age. We're going to have a new Gilded Age, but it's going to be...
Yeah. Gilded. Well, I think it's sort of like medieval. And then, so I will say too, the other thing is the big yellow dot, the ledger of record. We're going to hear a little bit about the master record of, holding everything, all the new information needs to be put on blockchain because of ChatGPT, and we won't know what's real and what's fake unless we have it on blockchain. That ledger of record, which was being promoted by Balaji Srinivasan, is a core aspect of the network state. And so all of this sort of goes together with some of the clips that we're going to show.
Yeah, and I know people are celebrating Eric Weinstein, because he spoke out on the COVID stuff, and so people are so transfixed on that, and they were, a lot of people are understandably upset about how all that went down, but they're not seeing this other thing that's happening here. And so we need to expand that conversation outside of just the health freedom space. So
yeah.
Because a lot of these people, a lot of the leaders within that space are literally building this stuff.
Exactly. They're building it. So, okay. So could we do the Internet of Everything?
Yes. Oh, the video?
And I would just say the whole thing of AI can do wonderful things for us all. We haven't consented to be part of the Internet of Bio-Nano Things. The AI is going to be integrated into the Internet of Bio-Nano Things, and we're not actually controlling that. Most people don't even know what it is. So I think a lot of this has to do with informed consent. And to be honest, I think it would take maybe a couple of generations for people to get enough information to make an informed decision about whether or not they wanted to participate. And that's simply not happening.
I'm looking for a video titled "The Internet of Everything." You know
what? You texted me about it. You said, "Did I want to include it?" And I added it.
Oh,
to
that
the
one.
playlist.
Yep. Okay.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
Yep, I got that. I need.
Well,
I guess
actually,
need
I had put this one up not for tonight, but it is kind of relevant. This is a part of I added it as an add-on to Leo's post. And
is that this thing?
yeah, because actually Lorraine Davison's piece on Talhar Desjardins and the noosphere, she specifically says that like Cambridge, the intellectual community of Cambridge in the 17th century was sort of the embryo for what would evolve into the noosphere imperative. And so the fact that this guy who is mentioned in Leo's book, he's a protege of Ian Akyildiz, who is Georgia Tech and a leader in the Internet of Bio-Nano Things space for years and years and years. They both happen to be Turkish. This guy's last name is Akan, and I guess he's now, I don't know if he's based in Cambridge or he just does an online course for them. But I thought that connection was significant. And, we do talk a lot about the nano. I'm still trying to sort of figure out with the Internet of Everything and knowing that Stuart Hameroff was writing about the logic of cytoskeletal structures and knowing that everything is moving towards like light-based computing and repurposing biology. I'm kind of still trying to suss out what the role is of like the nano electrical mechanical machines or whatever is like the artificial nano. And I've talked to Steffers about that because that's really her wheelhouse. And she says she senses that the goal is to replace our original biology, like operating system, with a nano machine related version. But I'm still like trying to sort all of that out. So anyway, this is about 3 minutes on the Internet of Everything.
Okay.
My name is Özgür Barış Akan. I am the head of the Internet of Everything Research Group at the Department of Engineering, University of Cambridge. My research interests are in wireless communications, biological, nanoscale, and molecular communications, as well as the Internet of Everything. We have recently come up with a novel and holistic vision of Internet of Everything, which aims at unleashing the synergy between heterogeneous information and communication technologies and IoT spaces. We have developed this new course on Internet of Everything in order to introduce the professionals with this holistic approach so that they can obtain the necessary skills to create and seize the opportunities for integrating the Internet of Things technologies into their businesses and daily lives. This course will equip the professionals with necessary skills to identify the potential solutions with IoT technologies using the current IoT space as well as emerging technologies in the Internet of Everything framework, such as Internet of vehicles, Internet of drones, Internet of senses. The professionals will be able to investigate novel case studies involving all these future Internet of Everything applications.
I just want to point out that window that's behind him, which is kind of interesting. Like, it looks like a cell membrane. They're sort of like hexagonal, but the color of the red and the green on it. Can you see like the hexagonal panes?
Yeah, for sure.
It looks almost biological. I just want to
it does
mention that it does feel telling.
They give you blood veins or something.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry.
No worries.
And will be able to contemplate groundbreaking applications in order to solve existing or upcoming problems in their businesses. The professionals at the end of this very interdisciplinary course will be able to systematically analyze their problem scenarios from the IoT perspectives and hopefully come up with new solutions based on the current and emerging IoT technologies. They will be able to also understand and identify the hidden interaction pathways between these heterogeneous Internet of Things technologies out there in the market, and also be able to come up with their own designs within the emerging Internet of Everything framework to be able to put forward new solutions with a maximized value added in their businesses.
Right. So I think it's interesting. I know you have your perspective on professionals, he used the word professionals a lot. The professionals will be able to do this. The professionals will be able to do that,
Yeah.
Because the professionals will just do what they're taught because they paid the money to get their Cambridge online course and get the credential and the badge. So they will just say whatever they learn in the class. They won't question it because they're professional.
Yeah, exactly. Got to
Right?
trust the authority on that. Sorry, your color was doing some weird things. Okay. Well, we have some other clips here as well. Did you want to say more on that particular one, or?
No, I guess I want to sort of say if you try on the lens that what this is community currency being set up as an answer to the CBDC problem, and to get people to pick them up and play the game in the Internet of Everything, and in doing so, playing with others, including like other non-humans, right? Because Ledgard wants to give wallets to the animals. Like, who knows? They might start giving wallets to, unicellular organisms or something like that.
Yeah.
And then all of the interactions get tracked. And then that's part of this pattern seeking, pattern finding behavior towards computation. Like, to me, that's what it feels like is happening. And I was saying to somebody today, I read those Adrian Tchaikovsky books about like Children of Ruin, and I can't remember, there were 3 of them. And it was about non-human intelligences and sensing. And in the middle one, it was about, it was sort of a body snatcher thing where a bacterial or some sort of like colony would take over a body. And at that point, the body's evolution would just stop. Like, it didn't die, but it couldn't progress as a human anymore. And it was driven by the need for novelty. And it was using humans as a platform to sort of ingest new experiences and new perspectives. And so like each body was a platform for this new novelty that the colony could then inhabit, right? And so it wasn't evil, but it was driven by this curiosity to do this. And then at the end, like the AI, who used to be a person, like negotiate some sort of middle ground to say, well, let's find some way that you can get your novelty without like freezing all of the humans, because that doesn't work either. And so there's part of me that wonders, because there've been several references in videos about, well, maybe the plants are just using us to cultivate themselves. There was a book about that, and I'm missing it. The green pill guy was talking about it. There's something of our desire.
Botany of desire.
Botany of desire, right? Like, oh, maybe the fungus or the plants are cultivating us so that we cultivate them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, increasingly, I'm wondering if this idea is a soulful, embodied intelligence. Like, what if there is some sort of other entity, like intelligence, that is a non-human intelligence that wants to use us as a tool into this? But ultimately, the desire would be not to go at it by force, military force, because that always takes more resources, but to simply to make an inviting opportunity, right? And that's what Alicia Guerrero was always talking about in flow. Design the landscape so that the energy flow will take you where you want it to go, right? So do we not imagine that the narrative landscape of CBDCs has been designed to flow us to the destination, which is to pick up the community currency tokens? To me, it feels an awful lot like exactly that's what's happening. And everyone is like in the rebellious sector is just flowing along with that story, and that has been designed and is probably continuing to readjust as we go along. But the readjusting landscape is the Web3, is the protocol. That's what you can push up, push and pull to make the hills or the valleys like, oh, wait a minute, they're getting a little off track. Throw up a hill on that side. Let's route them to the left, and then you get some influencers and they pop up and they, all of a sudden, there's a new thing that'll get them back in line. And they've chosen, like they could continue to walk up the hill and go over, but they just kind of go back down to the valley.
Yeah, totally. And I'll just say another thing too, in terms of like what you were talking about in terms of, is there some other energy or is there some other non-human thing? Like, to me, that's just like, it seems really far-fetched, but I'm actually open to any kind of possibility, because quite frankly, a lot of there's a massive amount of coordination that's going on here. I mean, these things that are all, they're all like working towards this similar like outcome. Like they're working towards this. There is coordination amongst all these things that might on the surface seem disparate. And what's driving that? Like,
but I don't think the individual dots know it really. Like they might know what's going on one or two dots next to them, but they don't know what's going on the other side of the map. They have no idea, and they have no interest in knowing really.
Right. And so the question is are these like old families that rule the world that this is how their thing, or is this some sort of alien thing, or is this some sort of something other something we don't even understand? I actually have no idea. But I do know that there's all these things are happening, and there is a coordination, and then they're leading to a certain place.
Well, I would just say, like, I know based on my research that there's incredible interest in the microbiome. Mm-hmm. Like, that's just a fact. Like, controlling the microbiome and your vagus nerve and the connection between your digestive tract and your brain is super important to scientists. Like, they're putting a lot of money into that. And a lot of our, like, the majority of the DNA that makes us up as a body isn't human, right? Like if you do it as a percentage, it's all the stuff that lives with us. Like we're a universe and constellations unto ourselves. So I know it may sound wacky to say like, well, maybe there is some way of representing life that is distributed and connected and networked, and that would be a microbiome. And how could that control an individual body or groups of people?
What was the fungus that would the fungus that would plant itself in the ant and then like basically take over the ant?
Zombie,
but to do it as a collective, I mean, it's happened. I mean, these things are being built. Like this is all the stuff we're talking about is really happening, but we can speculate about like what's behind it, but you don't even need to like do that necessarily to just look at it and see what's going on, Yeah.
So do you want to do Bruce?
Sure.
First.
Yeah.
So again, hat tip to Persepolis22 for linking this video and liking the clip and engaging in a good conversation. This is just about a month ago, so this is fairly recent. And again, supposedly I think Bruce is based in Romania. So this is him sort of talking about like, I helped build banks around the world for 10 years, but I didn't really understand what money was. And I thought you could probably vibe with that, Jason.
Yeah, I definitely vibe with that for years.
So setting up banks, I didn't really ask core questions about what is a bank. I knew how you could set up a bank to meet compliance requirements, IT requirements, reporting requirements, but I never asked as many questions about what is credit, what is deposits, what's loans, what is money. And when I met up with Trent in 2012 and joined this mastermind group in Berlin, we started asking those questions. And it came down to a point where I gave some MBA lectures on what is banking and what is money. And that's where I started realizing that we actually don't know what banking is. Very few people know what money is. And it shocked me that a fundamental aspect of our society is credit as well as currency is so poorly understood, even by somebody like myself who had spent at that time 10 years building banks. And so that was a thread that I thought would be really useful to pull at. And at the same time, it was also clear starting in the early 2000s all the way up until 2015 or so that there was accelerating technological change with mobile apps that just kind of gotten through their S-curve and come to adoption. We were starting to see different AI that was able to read people's brain scans and then generate an image that was close to what that person was actually imagining.
Wow.
And at that time, they had already...
I just want to like point that out. He's talking about AI monitoring brain scans and making pretty accurate assessments about what people were thinking. And I would say, I've added this to a recent map I made when we're going to talk about San Petrignano. And this is, I'm not the first person to find this, but there's a patent from 1974 where they're talking about like electromagnetic frequency and remotely monitoring people's, the EEG frequencies, and as a waveform. And being able to remotely decipher it, and then also being able to remotely use a computer to create a new waveform, heterodyne it, bring the two waves together, and reinsert it in the person's mind so that they imagine it as their own thought. So, and that was in 1974. And, it's, there's part of me that thinks some of the tech, that's consumer tech that's coming out about using headsets with EEGs to control video games, that potentially the technology is much more advanced than that, but they give you sort of baby steps to make it normal, to normalize it, right? Even though they may have things. So imagine Trent McConaughey and this idea of self-actualization and tokens and hive minds. And later on, Bruce Pond's, like, his whole idea is that we're going to have a new, our income stream will depend on our quote unquote intellectual property, which will be our participation in hive mind consciousness through tokenization. That how is this all being orchestrated through electromagnetism? It's very overwhelming, but it's just interesting to hear him bring that up.
Yeah. When on the technology is just a tool thing, that's what people don't think about, is the fact that this is a two-way. This is not just like I have a computer and I'm going to use the computer to do this, that, or the other thing. Like the technology is using you. It's, and that's just like, it's left out of the conversation. This is not
maybe
like
the fungi are in charge of the technology, Jason.
Maybe the fungi are, yeah, exactly. That's funny. All right.
They're all down there, like, with their little tentacles. Like,
when he always also talking about the money thing, like, what is money? Like, I actually have an actual textbook, a money and banking textbook, like official textbook. And if you read it, it's like, this is what the story is. Money is a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a measure of value. And it's actually, that's not all that it is. It's actually a steering mechanism. You can, and it always has been. Like, you think about, a king wants to go to war or whatever. How do you incentivize all these people to go do something that's not really in their nature? Because most people don't really want to go out and kill people and rob and loot. There's a handful of them that do, but so it's usually not enough to actually do a proper war. So you have this stuff called money that you can create. You have tokens. You can create tokens to then you can steer people in different directions, and people don't think about it in those terms. Like, people are still thinking about as if this is some sort of it's a mere representation of value, a measure of value, and a store of value, and a medium of exchange. That is not primarily what money. That's how we interact with it, but that's not actually what it is in a larger sense.
well, and I would say somebody commented about it being power, but I would say, like when the discussion that we had about complexity with Alicia Guerrero, when she was talking about this epigenetic landscape, she said you could either put energy into something. So say you have a ball and a pool ball and a cue stick, and you hit it. And that's like with force, and that's adding energy into the equation, right? And she said what she believes is preferable to that approach, which is inserting new energy into the system, is to simply contour the landscape of potential so that gravity flows and you get your outcome without the energy isn't actually put into the system, but you reconfigure the terrain towards the desired outcome. And it's a different kind of energy. And I would say, this is a map that I worked on with Leo and you on the atomic ecologies, looking at the origins of the environmental and ecological movement in the US and the Atomic Energy Commission, and the two brothers, Howard and Eugene Odum, who were centerpieces in developing the early textbooks on ecology, and then it later evolved into ecological economics and niches and competition. And it was all based on energy exchange. And that guy, Frederick Soddy, the physicist and chemist, that was about energy flow. And I think it was Howard, and he was based at University of Florida, Gainesville. And it's interesting because I think his focus was actually water. He had a whole language of energy exchange called emergy. And so I think that what the protocol layer isn't about adding extra energy into the system, but using the Web3 smart contracts to contour the terrain as like a watershed towards a desired outcome. And like, imagine, this is interesting, right? If we know that they're interested in doing modeling of watersheds, right? The Berkeley and the Stanford Physics Center, they're up in Colorado somewhere studying watersheds. What if the ocean, right? Like their ocean protocol, like what if the watershed ultimately is ending up to the ocean, but that ocean is the collective subconscious or unconscious, that by the time the ocean is in there, like they're able to steer the ocean somehow with this Web3, like the ocean of it. Maybe it's a stretch, but I'm increasingly feeling like the ocean they're talking about is not just an ocean of data or a data lake. I mean, even talking about data lakes, you know, I don't know. To me, anyway, I think it's all very interesting, but I think not just store of value and not just power, but I think of Web3 in particular, digital money that's tied to Web3 is about that kind of power, the energy and the complexity that's tied to the epigenetic landscapes. And that guy, Conrad Waddington, he was the guy who in the like 1920s or 30s developed the idea of epigenetic landscapes. And he was colleagues with Bernal, the crystallographer. So,
yeah, J.D. Bernal. Also, Frederick Soddy also wrote about money in addition to that. So it's interesting how these things keep going back. I mean, this is going back, decades, but just the biology and the money things keep there's a constant interplay there. So it's what people think about money, people need to like rethink some of this stuff, and I'm still in process of rethinking about it every day.
Applying the history to what is unfolding. And I think that was some of the critique that we had of some of the other influencers, like surfacing the history and going, here, let me drag all this out and show you bad, but not actually saying like this history is self-replicating in cycles and the newest iteration is appearing this way. So let's apply some foresight based on what we know and what we see emerging in the Web3 space, and then extrapolate from that about making some projections about what the intentions are coming. That's the missing piece that oftentimes gets dropped.
Yes.
And then generate an image that was close to what that person was actually imagining.
Wow.
And at that time, they had already rolled out things like energy systems and our transmission grids that's run by AI. The load balancing on everybody's energy grid in most places in the world is run by AI nowadays. And so it was clear to me that AI was going to take a lot more of the work of humans, calculating work, manual work, traditional work, away, and that there was the one thing that separates us from machines is creativity, the ability to have kind of quantum leaps in imagination, connect the dots in our own human way, work with the machines and figure out something. And that's actually how I got into Web3, because I thought to myself that if we can put a value on data, if we can put a value on intellectual property on top of a blockchain using this type of Bitcoin ledger and database layer, then every human has a chance to participate in a machine economy. I tweeted yesterday, actually, that most people are scared that AI will become more like humans as it gets better. I actually put the counterintuitive proposal that we become more like the machines as AI gets better. And that's something I would stand by.
Good Lord. Yeah. So do you all stand by that? Who out there stands by that?
See,
but if we have these conversations, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, what did he say? He said, they need our creativity. They need our imagination, our ability to connect the dots. And we're supposed to work for the machine or with the machine.
And become like the machine. Well, I don't know, but he says,
like the machine. Like, I don't, but that symbiosis is what he's talking about, that Licklider symbiosis that goes all the way back. And so, again, to me, that would be perfectly consistent with what I'm saying, what I've been saying about biohybrid computing and needing us as creative beings. Like, why the emphasis on the creative economy? Why the emphasis on art, connected to AI, why the emphasis on storytelling and narrative, and imagination. I think that's all being fed because that's something that whatever the system is doesn't have on its own. It's like a parasitic system that needs to hook into that which it doesn't have, which is the things that he just described.
Right. So we're the host.
We're the host, yeah.
Let's see. Which one was that? That was. Oh, so okay, yeah. Boom. So let me bring up the next one here. This one?
Yeah, I think so.
Of the blockchain and AI that weave itself into this overall philosophy that I have, that we need to give people more chances for agency.
That's why I'm working in Web3. That is a thing that actually makes me
Agency.
interested in it.
Well, and what kind of agency is that really? Like you're given these binary choices, and maybe you have, a dozen of them. Who knows? The computational, the very nature of computation, means it's like the Merkle tree. You got to, that's the whole design of the whole thing. So if it doesn't, I mean, I guess they'll find little niches, and like we've joked about, like they'll put us on our own little cell over in the corner here.
Yeah. But see, I think the next time people hear agency, they should think agent-based modeling.
Right.
And that's like really central to Leo's discussion. His recent blog post is the role of the multinational insurance companies, which is something that's really grown to be his specialty, is looking at the role of the insurance companies in getting the big data sets on risk and prediction modeling, and how they're going to actually be steering things through their own derivatives products, and also potentially, with their thumb on the scale of weather engineering or tectonic weapons or what have you, to geopolitical things to disrupt supply chains to game their parametric insurance portfolios. But core to that is that individuals with a digital identity are agents. And so this, like, going on and on and on about giving us agency, like that's not a gift.
Yeah.
That's a sentence. Like, you are sentenced to be an agent in our game.
Yeah, and I think the word agency, the way that I've been using it for many, many years now, is probably not the right word that I need to be using, because I've always used it in terms of like you have agency, which means you have choice, you have liberty to do this, that, or the other thing. And that's not, if you actually look up the textbook definition of it, it really like talks about more, you're an agent of, like being an agent of like the FBI or something. You're an agent of another thing. So it's not kind of how I've been using it anyways. So maybe I need to rethink that word, because agency, people think of agency as having like some sort of autonomy.
But I think that's the way it has been set up, because the agent-based modeling was happening all throughout the Cold War.
Right.
So this idea of adopting the idea of agency as an affirmative right or privilege, that would have coincided with that. Like it would have been an outgrowth of the people who were working on the agent-based simulations that go all the way back. I mean, probably to World War II, but like definitely during the Cold War, all of that Cold War game theory was agent-based modeling.
Yeah.
So, like at least, in my lifetime and your lifetimes, people talking about agency, it would have been within that context. And yet it's not commonly understood as that. So we just think we know what it means, but like, I don't think that word means what you think it means.
Yes, exactly. All right.
The foundational technological basis of it, just to be able to, the way that it's democratizing access to so many things. What you're talking about is democratizing access to data, really, and the ability to utilize data in the ways that before was severely gatekept, or the barrier to entry was way too high because of the cost of computing or the cost of people or those kinds of things. And what kinds of ways are you seeing that democratization or access or agency happening now?
I'll start with the punchline and then work backwards.
Sure.
With the release of GPT in December, and now as of the last few weeks, where we see all these deep fakes of Donald Trump in whatever camel gear or whatever, or Elon Musk walking around with AOC and all this sort of stuff, we're now at the stage where unless the data has been attested to and ascribed to a blockchain, you're not going to be able to trust it.
Right.
What that means is everything, all the data pre-blockchain will be unreliable and needs to be questioned in the future. 10 years from now, when somebody is trying to rewrite the past and they create a deep fake based on AI of John Kennedy saying something that he didn't say, people may not know what is truth and what is fiction. And the only way to make that truth happen is to have authenticity and provenance built into the source of the data on a blockchain. And then that means that all data eventually needs to go into blockchains in order to be trusted. Once that happens, you will have the AI algorithms running through all these various blockchains, developing insights, and being able to give us verified truths, patterns, predictive analytics, and different ways to see our world and create value using the AI that's based off the data on the blockchain. So that's the punchline. Moving back from that, what the point was is that in order for that economy to happen, you need a digital native currency that's not bound to a nation, something that a machine can access and utilize to garner resources. That's something like Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any other cryptocurrency. You need the data on a blockchain. That's on any L1 or base chain. And then you also need the ability for people to license that data for money, for under which terms and conditions, etc. And then you need a protocol that allows that interaction to happen seamlessly with auditability so that you know in every instance how your data has been used, if it's been used according to the terms that you want, and that your wallet gets credited with the money. So that's, I just went through a lot of things like a digital native currency, the fact that all data needs to be on blockchains, the fact that you need to have a handshake protocol in order for this economy to work. And the compensation for anybody who is producing that data and making it accessible. Those are kind of like the four components, and all of that revolves around crypto and blockchain.
No, thank you.
But you've been talking for a while about the AI narrative, right? And that it's you think it's being used in a certain way for a certain purpose. Do you want to say a little bit? Because I mean, to me, that clip really reinforces that idea.
Yeah, for sure. And so I don't think the narratives around AI are actually accurate. Like, oh, it's going to become conscious and all this other, I think that they're giving you these red herrings to worry about, when what I think is the AI, the danger of AI is it being used exactly what it's been built to be used for, which is the management of all of this stuff. Those handshakes that he's talking about, these protocols. He already said that, the grid, the energy load on the grid's already being managed by AI, but our energy, our activity is going to be managed on the through AI on the blockchain. So my thing is it's a governing mechanism, and that's what
but it's a problem reaction solution.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
I mean,
they're scaring you about it killing everybody, or it taking. I don't think any of that's even.
Well, even that it's going to eliminate everybody's job, or that all the information coming out of that is good or accurate. A lot of it's bullshit, really. I mean, a lot of it's really crap and wrong information. I have, a colleague who did a whole presentation at her university about her personal experience, even on her own biography, how a lot of the stuff was made up. I mean, they're spinning a thing oh, it's inevitable. We won't be able to trust anything because of this supreme being. Well, it's not that. It's shoddy, actually. A lot of it's just they're weaving a story, and then again to use that, and even the writer's strikes, the creatives, the Hollywoods, that's being set up to, oh, look, they're going to scrape your data for free. Well, as long as if you have a digital identity and it's all locked in, then you can get a micropayment for your work, right? Well, that's not that's not going to be living wage work.
These micropayments are going to be a joke anyways. And not only that, once you incentivize, you tokenize, incentivize anything, it starts to affect us in terms of how we behave in the world. We are no longer what I would say individual autonomous agents, but we are agents in this larger sense of players on this game board. But once you incentivize things, just that's what it's like social impact finance. It's like you're creating incentives for different things, and that's going to change who we are and what we do and how we behave in the world. It's not just like this thing that's on top of it that's assisting us in any way.
Right. Well, I would say too, like that links to the attention economy, like the token attention economy. And like when we went to Rockfin's campus in Austin, I said, the reality is that if you are providing content and you're getting paid like through these online platforms, it's a different thing than, for what it's worth. Like we've just been providing non-paywall open content since the beginning. And the thing is, if your salary is dependent on eyeballs on screens, the algorithms, and then you're reporting to a company that once more expects you to grow the number of subscribers and eyeballs on screens, they're going to have data dashboards and leaderboards and all sorts of analytics that tell you, well, when you say this, the readers, the watch viewership goes up to that. And then when you do this, it goes down. And so, people like us or Raul or some other people who were working on things that were really important, but not the trendy, hot button, emotional driven topics, wouldn't get those eyeballs. They simply wouldn't. And so there's really not a revenue stream in the attention token economy for anything but stuff that reinforces polarity, emotionality, fragmentation. I mean, that's just that's the logic of that business model, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, I guess we currently have 82 viewers. So what's our value? Wow. What's our value in this system?
But see, for me, it's like when you get beyond the point that it's a numbers game.
Yeah.
And again, my economic situation has changed, right? I'm looking for work, and I'm, so I have to figure out, there's the, it's challenging, right? But I'm really committed, and I feel like it's not about the numbers. It's about the clarity. And I think that if you understand that what this is happening well beyond the material world that we can see and sense, that the energetics of the Web3 system extend beyond just the physicality of the world that we're in. And so if they are concerned about our creativity, our imagination, our spiritual practice, our connection to life itself, then if we even just have small numbers of people who do have clarity, and again, not with aggressiveness or going to war with it, but to just to me, the image of the grandmother in the Tucson park in the labyrinth who's holding the basket with the labyrinth. That's what I strive for, is if we're in it, which we all are, but if we can see it with clarity enough that we could find the edges and pick it up and hold it, right? To have it close. I won't say to have agency with it, but or command it, but at least be able to pick it up, that even small numbers of people who can do that matters.
Yeah. Well, and I agree with you there. I only brought that up in terms of, because I think you and I have both consistently chosen not to, do what's best for building our audience or do what's best for bringing in money or whatever. Yeah, exactly. And even before I met you, I consistently was taking steps that I knew would lose me parts of my audience, because I was like, no, actually, this is something really important. We need to talk about it. And, but within a market, that type of work within a market doesn't work in a market. We are not, and I'm not saying it even should. I'm just saying that, that was the reason why I brought up, we don't actually, the work that we're doing here doesn't actually have value, or it has very little value in this context. And I disagree. I think it actually has value. But I'm not saying that, like we need to be rewarded, but I'm just saying that there's the problem with that
There are
incentivized.
perverse incentives. There are
Exactly.
very perverse incentives in these systems, and they're self-reinforcing, and then they lead to outcomes. And like even people who study complex systems understand that once you start iterating and creating these feedback loops and speeding them up and moving them into supercomputing, they know that they're not in control. Like they know that these systems, that humans are not in control of the outcomes of these systems. So why would we choose to do that? So
Yeah, and not only that, like, and by the way, again, this is all military and intelligence technology, and do you really think they care about the U.S. has always, since World War I, the U.S. has been supposedly bringing democracy to the world.
it was tokens, Jason. They were bringing tokens.
They're bringing token democracy to the world.
Tokens.
So I mean, yeah, there's that aspect of it, for the fact that even his story is not even an accurate story about like what's really going to go on, because we know it's not going to be this honest democratic system anyhow. But there's layers to the bullshit to scoop up.
Yeah. Well, I would say that the thing too on the democracy is I've noticed that there's a major funder, this guy Stavros Niarchos, who's a Greek shipping magnate. And so he's, setting up all of these democracy institutes in like universities lately. So like, there's the American democracy, but then there's also the whole Greek the demos and the Athenian city-state, which, I was reading, it's under the computer, Cryptonomicon. There's a whole section about Athena, and that the Athena being the goddess of wisdom and war and craft versus Ares, who is the god of war, but in the more physical, stupid kind of war. And the hackers were uplifting Athena as their patron because her connection with craft and technology and intelligent strategy, right? And so if that the crypto hackers were aligned with Athena, and that Josiah Ober, who is connected to Jeremy Pitt, the socio-technical systems, had said that the original superorganisms were the Athenian city-state. Like he imagined the Athenian city-state as that superorganism intelligence. So the model, if that's the case, is to take that and apply it globally. So yeah, I mean, I used to be like, again, on the left, and they give you a certain way to think about things. And again, it is empire, but like, okay, so what if the fungi are running the empire? Or what are the bacteria running the empire? It's an interesting construct, but I had always situated it strictly as the US. And even at the time, I kept thinking, well, but I don't think we're responsible for all of it. And then once you realize it's the noosphere, it's a global network system, then you realize that almost every culture, the geopolitics of every region of the world probably has a role to play in advancing this. And they overlap and they somewhat repeat, and then some of them are distinct roles. And so the idea of the Cold War, okay, so Russia, you go work on this, this parapsychology, and China, you guys work on the AI, and we'll work on weaponizing space, and then we'll all converge, right? You could have different kind of key points. And so, I've stepped back a little bit of like the U.S. is the sole problem. Really, all of these entities, even, India is being targeted, the African countries are being targeted, but at the same time, they've raised their class of leaders and educated them in the West to come back and implement this in their country. So you can't really say that India isn't a willing and active participant within its leadership class to roll this out. Like it's not the farmers, but the leadership class. You can't say that they're not accountable because someone's forcing their hand. It's simply how society has proceeded.
Yeah, definitely. When on the localization, the local futures, there's a channel and their group, I forgot the name of the woman, but there was a new term that I heard recently called glocalization. So it's like global, like global localization, glocalization. It's stupid.
I can't imagine what that looks like. Yeah.
Well, it's the idea that if you go to their local futures YouTube channel, they have, they're promoting localization, which actually support localization, but it's localization that's connected to a global network, essentially. Oh. So that's the whole glocalization. Yeah, you're exactly. You're still under this. Exactly.
node in the network state.
Exactly.
Okay.
Your local.
I think there's a couple more. So the next one is that Brett. Did I have Brett Weinstein
Yeah,
up next?
Brett Weinstein is up
So
here
he's
next.
another one. So this is a mashup. I haven't listened to this whole thing. I ran out of time. But essentially, this guy, Amy and Devon James, they're promoting Web3. They've set up a nonprofit to promote Web3. And, they seem like nice enough people, but I'm sort of like, well, where's Mark Andreessen? Where are the, high level people? Who are these people compared to Andreessen Horowitz? But okay, so they've got a nonprofit and they're promoting Web3. And evidently they've been consulting with Brett Weinstein for years and years and years behind the scenes on how to keep the internet secure and safe. So there's a few bits. There's his introduction, and it definitely seems like he's looking for opportunities, right? This is not maybe somewhere in there's a bit of a critical lens, but they're tell us how this is going to make it all work. They're at least clued in enough that there's a section about Scott Stornetta and the origins of decentralized ledgers. So there's that. And then there's Brett at the end saying, we need, in order to address the ChatGPT, we need everything on blockchain. So a similar narrative.
And for those of you who don't know Scott Stornetta, we actually saw him speak at the Mormon Transhumanist Conference, and he is the one who basically created the ledger system that blockchain is built on. I mean, he came up with the foundation for that.
And it's a time stamping document. So he and Stuart Haber at Bell Labs, and it's interesting because here they sort of have this toss up there were these two guys. They found some wrong things in a biology paper, so they created this. They're no, it was Bell Labs. They weren't just two guys. This is a big deal. But the time stamping, to me, if we go back to think about masking threshold and oscillation and vibration and frequency, time is a vibratory quality. The oscillation, a metronome, right? And then trying to get everyone in sync. The timing. And that's part of the cell cleaving cells and then, creating organisms. And that's sort of there's a musical symphony to that, really, of how that happens. But you can change time scales. And that's something that Michael Levin talks about, is that nerves communicate within a certain time scale, but everything else in the body does too, including cells, but just at a much slower time scale. And so I think it's really interesting that a lot of the people is it the Foundation for Long Now, or the Long Now Foundation in the Bay Area? They're building, or the people connected with them are building this 10,000 year clock in the hills of West Texas, right? Jeff Bezos has a ranch, and the Long Now people are building a 10,000 year clock. So I just keep thinking, what are they synchronizing? What is the synchronization across 10,000 years? There would be no real other reason to build that clock rather than to have some sort of function around synchronization of some process, some collective process.
Well, I mean, I guess someone could argue that it's just an art piece, and it's maybe to get people to think, just like the clock with on Wall Street with the national debt or whatever.
It's maybe in the middle of nowhere. You can't get to it.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's very, maybe it's conceptual, but
it's a conceptual piece for sure. But it's a very expensive project.
The guy, I can't remember his name. He was connected to thinking machines, the earliest fast supercomputers at MIT. I have to look up thinking machine, but yeah. So, and I think there was a sticker for thinking machine on the guy's computer in masking threshold. So it's a thing. And he's connected to Disney too. So it's there's a lot going on, but I guess we can listen to it. But clearly, once you start paying attention to the narrative is Web3, we can use it to save the internet and save us from AI, right? And
climate change and nuclear war and the laundry list.
Hey folks, welcome to the Dark Horse Podcast. I have the pleasure of sitting with my good friends Amy and Devon James, who are co-executive directors of the Web3 Working Group, which is a 501c3. They know things. I've been talking to them for years about questions surrounding the security and functioning of the web, and I'm going to persuade them to speak as much in English as possible in talking about where we are headed and what internet it is we will face once we get there. Amy and Devon, welcome to Dark Horse.
Hi, Brett. It's so good to see you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Great to see you, Brett.
Yeah.
So I just want to point out like the background there. I don't know what's on the right, but so you have the Patriot, you've got the flag right there, right? So that's kind of interesting because clearly Web3 isn't a nationalist project. So I mean, it's an interesting choice to feature prominently like a US flag. Then you've got the ARPANET map, the US outline with ARPANET, the first nodes. That's not the first were like the first 4 nodes, but there's some on the East Coast, so that's later. But again, that's JCR Licklider, and that's, human machine symbiosis. And then underneath you have, I don't know what that is, but there's a sign that says be natural.
Yeah, it's some kind of a photograph, but yeah, there's nothing natural about any of this.
Well, there's nothing natural about Web3. And then the other thing is the whole B, like it's BE, but it could be BEE, like the whole hive mind. To me, it just seems very contrived. I'm assuming the other sign says, what kind of internet do you want? And then maybe it's the be natural kind, which is the hive mind, But it's I just want to point out that it's an interesting encoding of the backdrop there. I can't read what's on the right behind the other guy.
Yeah, I can't either. It's too small. It's okay.
Yeah, it's great to see you guys. It has been a long journey behind the scenes where we have checked in regularly about issues of safety and security on the web, issues of I can't use the term equitable anymore, but the way that the web distributes content and pays creators, all sorts of issues that are increasingly central to this mechanism we all use to interface. Mm-hmm. So what I'm hoping you guys will do is talk to us about the current state of the web, about Web3. I'm hoping you will define that term.
Exactly when Web3 began, because Bitcoin came out in 2009, but blockchain actually came out the same year that the web did, or it was invented the same year that the web did.
1991, I think.
Around then, you're right. Mm-hmm. And it was actually to solve, it was a couple of guys named Haber and Stornetta that wanted to solve they ran into some fraudulent biology papers. And they wanted to be able to basically say, I want to have, or really what it was is they saw that some changes had been made. Something had been published, and then they made changes to it, and then they republished it. And it wasn't transparent that the changes had been made. And so they wanted to have a database that was replicated enough times where each copy of it was identical to each other so that you could actually see if anyone's trying to make any alterations to things.
And we look at the technologies. You're talking about a mechanism for ensuring authenticity. Well, suddenly authenticity is on a lot of people's minds because we recognize that we're like hours away from deep fakes that are so good that you can't detect them by looking at, the direction of the shadows and the stuff that we used to be able to do to figure out whether a photograph was for real.
Okay.
So I just mostly wanted to put that because this is part of the Game B environment. Do you happen to have the picture of him and Jim Rutt? Did you have
yes,
that one?
I do. Yeah.
Cool.
Hold on one
so second. I just want to I know Eric is involved with Jim Rutt and Game B, but there was a whole video of the story of Game B with Brett Weinstein and Jim Rutt on Rebel Wisdom. That was from 3 years ago. So this whole program has been in place for a long time. And I would just say, all you have to do is I don't spend all of my time looking around at, who's interviewing whom. But there's a lot of people who are on those podcasts, Rebel Wisdom. You think about how many people watch those shows and understanding, there's nothing rebellious about Web3. There's nothing rebellious about that game. That game has been planned out from the beginning. And Brett Weinstein, this is from his webpage on the About tab. And the first line is, Dr. Brett Weinstein has spent 2 decades advancing the field of evolutionary biology. So he's an evolutionary biologist, which goes exactly into the noosphere, right? Guided evolution. And he is currently working to uncover the evolutionary meaning of large-scale patterns in human history. Okay, that sounds like AI. And seeking a game theoretical stable path forward for humanity. Right? A game theoretical stable path forward. That is protocol-based homeostasis. That is Game B. It is in the protocol layer where you are playing as an agent in one of these simulation models that you're certainly not going to be fully in control of the rules of the game. And so I guess, to me, it's just so obvious what all these people are. And then you've got his brother, who's the mathematician who was working for Teal Capital, a managing partner there, who was talking about, a Manhattan project, that we need a Manhattan project. I can't remember, was it for like data science or something? And, Eric was talking about merging econophysics, biophysics, and social physics. So, yeah, I mean, and he even says, he's like, I've been working with you behind the scenes for years and years. So tell me about Web3. Well, anybody
sounds real democratic.
Our stuff should just be pretty much anyone in that circle. Now you know exactly what it's about.
Yeah, definitely.
Here's Bruce again. So I can't remember what I said that this one is. But
okay, I'll just play it.
Birth, death, marriage, college, all that kind of data, your academic history, what you've said, videos of you, deep fakes, all this sort of stuff. There's going to be ways where you can kind of timestamp every single action where you have generated data to a blockchain, and it can be tied back to you because you will have a unique identifier. There's a protocol, ERC 725, which is called private profiles. One of our friends, one of the original kind of core developers of the Ethereum blockchain, Fabian Vogelsteller, has helped create this one. And that is exactly that, where you can have a profile where you attach multiple attributes to it. And because those attributes are essentially nothing more than just different parts that you control of your data, you can then make that accessible over time. And that could be the library of music that you've created, the library of videos, the writings, the demographic and your biometrics data. All that stuff is going to be able to be attached to a human. And that's one of the cores of Oceans, that we give power back to individuals in a world where machines are allocating resources, but we as humans have a way to earn money off of our own data to produce value and have agency to do something even greater than what we could have ever imagined. I mean, that's the hope. Whether or not people choose to kind of enter this world and take the most advantage of it, that's a different question. But our goal is to give the tools, but we don't guarantee the outcome.
It's interesting. He says, if people choose, what kind of choice do you have? I mean, basically, you're going to be persona non grata if you choose not to. I mean, yeah, you ever see, I saw a documentary about this guy. Tom Hanks made a movie that was kind of loosely based on the story, but the guy that went to I think it was Paris. He like lived in the Paris airport for like 18 years because he didn't have his ID, or he didn't have his, he didn't have a nation state basic. I mean, he did, but like he didn't have the right paperwork or whatever.
I remember that. Yeah.
This guy lived there for like 18. I'm not even kidding. It was like 18 years. Yeah. And then finally they helped him like get it after many, many years. But it's like that idea that like you don't exist in any natural sense, like just because I'm here, I'm a real human being. Like, no, where's your papers? I mean, of course it's not papers. But you're not validated. You're not a validated human being. And so that's a pretty radical shift into, going online and you're having, constantly having to prove, but with interoperability and like the Internet of Things and augmented reality, it's not just going to be I'm going online to look something up or getting an app. It's going to be your interfaces with the actual real world, and you're going to be excluded, perhaps to the detriment of your own survival, like literally.
But the thing that he doesn't say, so he's framing it as economic empowerment, right? Oh, you can keep all of these things and then you can make money off of them. But what they're not saying is like with these zero knowledge proofs and how it works in an Internet of Things connected world, right? If you don't have the tokens, the door won't open. If you don't have the token, you can't get the job. If you don't have the token, you can't get the food, or you can't rent the bike, or you can't, like all of these things in an Internet of Things connected world, even though you'll have quote unquote privacy, will be determining. Everything is gamified, right? And they don't talk about that. And they don't talk about the use of your data potentially for prediction modeling purposes either. And that it is a digital twin. They don't talk about remote labor. They don't talk about living as an avatar. I mean, there is a bit of Schadenfreude at the end. He's like, well, we don't guarantee how it's going to turn out. We're just making the tools, right? You can do it or you cannot do it. We don't guarantee the results. But I think he must know the problematic nature of it. And then I would say too, if you think about this idea of aggregating data points, when I was really trying to push Glenn Weil and Pooja Olhaver and Buterin on their soulbound tokens, and I'm like, these look like metadata tags. Like your soulbound tokens look essentially like metadata tags that could be used for impact interventions and later to verify impact markets. Is that what it is? And they would never answer. And then I got blocked by them. But it's not just the soulbound tokens. It's also the proof of participation.
Yes.
They call that, but they pronounce
POAP. Yeah, POAP.
Right. So, but isn't it strange that given all that we know about the role of the Catholic Church in impact finance, that the things that we're talking about now are popes and soulbound tokens?
Yeah.
It's a little weird. I mean,
yeah,
honestly,
that's kind of funny.
When you think about it, it's a bit weird. Like the popes off, and dispensations or whatever, you shall be allowed. And, this is something I'm going to touch on when we talk about San Patrignano, but part of the conversation with, RFK Jr. and Jimmy Dore that involved his addiction recovering and spiritual awakening, realignment, I guess is what he said, RFK Jr. He was talking about the importance of obedience and surrender, almost like spiritual surrender to God. And so, again, I'm not trying to contest anyone's particular faith practice, but when you've got institutions that are holding people often against their will, because people in these recovery often are put in there, you can go to jail or you can go to recovery center. So you've got a coercive environment potentially where there are certain expectations and you're demanding that people under the guise of spiritualism that you surrender. That has especially given what we know about how the history of San Patrignano, has the power to end up incredibly abusive and violent in all of this. So the whole thing is just, and there was another clip that we had a while back that was Buterin. It was that 2 months where all the Web3 people lived together, and listened to lectures. And he was talking about digital identity, but he's like, but it's not a health passport, right? He's like, this is your digital ID, but it's not the bad health passport kind. But clearly it is all of those things. Yeah,
it's all and more. It's that and more.
Wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more.
And I would say to me, once you understand the kids at the surveillance play tables in preschool, I know this Tanzania paper that I wrote, it starts off with the blockchain recording of compliance for the, prenatal compliance for the pregnant women, but all of that, right? He's not saying, and when you put your child, send them to Head Start and they do the weekly check-in at the surveillance play table, that goes on there too. Yeah. They're always just talking about it in these glowing terms.
Right. And then the insurance piece of it too. It's like, okay, you're not meeting your requirements, so we're going to drop you or something. or we're going to charge you extra or something. Yeah.
Well, I think that comes up next, because I think the next one's about UBI and how he's actually for UBI as long as the government isn't running it. As long as you can be your own data entrepreneur, it's all fine.
Yeah. With the government not running it, again, your government is not, it's about to change. Your government is, as you've known it, is going not completely away, but it's being replaced by these networked systems. So it's like they're building government. That's what they're building. This is all governments. This is governance. This is a new governance system. And if people don't understand that, they're missing the boat, because just focus, the government bad. It's like, yeah, okay, fine. Then why are you building this other thing that's actually more invasive?
Right. A global government system. Yeah. It's libertarian global government system.
Yeah. Oh, well, that one's good. I'm okay with that one.
Yeah.
As long as I can make some micropayments.
I think the main thing is UBI from the bottom up. So universal basic income. Universal basic income is a very controversial topic because it's a top-down government kind of, not government, but maybe like a World Economic Forum driven concept. And so from that perspective, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
Oh yeah, World Economic, they're bad. So what's the good one? Tell us, what's the good one?
Yeah.
I'm glad it's not Klaus Schwab, because we know, like, you know.
Yeah, exactly. I bet it's going to be your mega church, your mega church and Mark Andreessen and whatever. Yeah. Blackstone will do it for you.
Yeah. But that's like the World Economic Forum, the Klaus Schwab, that's what do they call it, like a dog whistle?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. No.
I do believe on UBI from the bottom up, where you lived your life. You take your steps every day. You do all the things you need to do for your health and nutrition. You meet with friends. You do social media. All that stuff is going to be part of your data vault. That is something that you can then monetize in the future. And this is going to be available to all 8 billion people if we set the stage properly. And that is UBI from the bottom up, not from the top down. And that is something that I have devoted the last 10 years of my life to, and I'm probably going to devote the rest of it to while I'm working. And so that's the kind of baseline for everybody. For entrepreneurs, here's something I was just thinking about. It is because you have GPT that has scanned the entire open web, free data is worthless now. It used to be that free data you could maybe package and try to sell and all that kind of stuff. It's worthless. ChatGPT has completely made that stuff worthless economically, because with one prompt you can already say, put this in a table, give me the top 3 insights, put it into a graph, and then load it into a dashboard. Anybody can do that. And so, of course, you can start selling services based off of that, et cetera. I think that the power is going to be private data, hence everybody's personal data vault, that is inaccessible to GPTs. And that GPT is going to be granted permission to go through 1 million data sets, get these insights. Those insights will then be token gated. So you're going to have token gated private data from people's vaults, and you're going to have token gated insights, feature vectors, and AI. That is the data economy that we're trying to enable. And if you're an entrepreneur, just like YouTube has made it so that you could have millions of channels, each having their own little creative niche and topic niche and earning money from, you're going to have people who are going to be able to access that data vault.
I just want to say these niches that he's talking about, like that works with the ecological economics, but like I guess we're a niche, like tonight, like whoever tunes in for these things, like we're our own niche. But that's part of that emergent behavior, and I think that's something that Quantum Heart Cafe has been looking at in emergence. Is like YouTube. It's interesting to put that lens on it, right? Like YouTube in its feed is steering its own sort of units of like-minded groupthink, into these niches, and then the niches then can be steered into more complex behaviors.
Well, it's such a joke anyways, because what makes the data valuable is volume. So like the individual that's like, I'm going to start my own little company with my data. Like, oh, do you want to know what I ate for lunch? I mean, it's like, you're not going to make any money off of that anyways. I mean, it's kind of laughable.
An ethical manner.
Imagine that stuff being linked to impact deals too.
What's that?
If you think about like, if part of the UBI involves participating in social impact, pay for success programs, like you'll have like a tag on you that says you are a participant in this program, and then your behaviors or compliance or non-compliance will verify into that deal. Right. So they may compensate you as a participant in a pay for success program if they get the data for the verification.
Right.
Right. And that's something it just occurred to me, but there's a key piece in Leo's new post where they're talking about Matiga, what did they call it? Participatory surveillance.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's in the thing where Matiga was saying, like, here, tell us how you are feeling today, and submit this survey, and then you'll get some tokens. And it was framed as participatory surveillance. And I can see that whole program growing exponentially within the context of ESG aligned impact finance. And then you create tokenized revenue streams for participatory surveillance linked to this stuff. I can totally see that. I can see Ocean Protocol being all in the middle of all of that.
Yeah.
Going to be able to access that data vault in an ethical manner with permission under the terms that each individual person has set for their data vault, and then create AI and insights that can then be sold. When that AI is sold, it feeds back to every single data vault, just a micropayment, which may be a cent or two a day per AI algorithm, let's say. But you aggregate that across 1 million different AI researchers who have built algorithms, and then you have 1 million cents a day. That is UBI that I can stand behind, because it puts power into the control of humans, as well as entrepreneurs, to innovate. There is no need for a government on this one, because you as an individual have already chosen your defaults that you feel comfortable with. And I don't deny that somebody's just going to open up the kimono and just open up all their data, and they're going to be maybe more exposed than they should be. Mm-hmm. But I want to give people that choice. And that is the vision that I'm building.
What a guy.
Once again, I still think that there are societal level risks that governments definitely need to play a role in. But the more that we can give individual liberty and power back to humans, the better the world's going to be, because humans know what's right for them, and they can act faster and take agency more effectively than any government can. I never thought that I was going to be a libertarian, by the way. This is like, I sound like a fully blown red-pilled libertarian.
Yes, you do. And I keep saying, like, libertarians have a specific role in this, and the role is to be like the freedom, independence loving agents in the game, right? And the choice piece is important, because the narrative of totalitarianism and that you won't have any choice and that people will be bossing you around at every single thing, like that's the problem, reaction, solution. The solution is going to be that you will have some choice, and that's the wisdom of the crowd. As long as you're monitored in the choices you make as part of the group, that's what's interesting to the AI, is the choice you make under which certain conditions. And so I think that's really important when you're listening to these feeds and you're seeing what's spewing through, is that the emphasis on the punitive nature of everything. And I'm not going to say there's going to be no punishment, but that's the setup, that's the foil for the next piece, which is, oh, well, we'll give you some great opportunities. Look, this is our freedom token, and you can have some choices here, and this is how we do things over here. This is our community, and our community does it like this. Wouldn't you like to do it like this too? And we, these are sort of the general parameters, and then that is all monitored. And again, if you understand niches, what he's saying about different communities, different channels, they'll steer you into a niche that I think they'll steer you into something you're generally comfortable with.
Yeah.
They don't want a bad reaction. They want you to go, oh, this is not so bad, and then get used to it.
Yeah, unless you're not comfortable with any of it, in which case you're just excluded from life. I mean, it's. I used to argue with people about like sweatshops, and they was like, oh, people, they don't have to work in there. Like, no one's holding a gun to their head. I'm like, actually, if you go in their community, they literally can't eat unless they get this stuff called money. And the only place they can get that stuff called money is this shitty factory that treats them like shit. So once the precondition for life is now on these tokens, you need to have the token in order to do any interaction or exchanges. You're excluded. That's not a choice. That's not really even a choice. But yeah, they're going to give you within the thing. You could do this, or this. Though it's not like there are going to be some choices within that. But the choice to not be a part of it that's not a choice. Yeah, I think that's what's going to. So we have two more. We have the
last two, the epigenetic lands. Michaela Uluru, I think, is next, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think I can't prove it, but I would hazard a guess that somewhere in the background of what's going on with Ocean Protocol is Michaela, because we've got the Romania, we've got Canada, we have complexity, we have emergence, and I feel like she's in there in the background. So this is a clip that I did a while ago from a talk she gave at singularity.net about governance, which again, the libertarians are trying to get rid of the government so that they can run onto the protocol layer that's entirely a cybernetic AI government, which is very silly. But they're talking about like how I think complexity and groups work. So.
Okay. Oh, hold on. Sorry, 1 second. And
I would say, again, if you're just sitting there saying money's power, money's power, money's power, you're not actually listening to what we have to say. So, like, I don't know why you're here if if you're not actually listening. It's about what Michaela Ulrah is talking about.
Right.
It's about tokenization and incentivization. It's soft power, maybe.
Yeah.
It's direct.
Yeah. Money does give, one who has money gives them power, but there's a lot more to this going on. It's the whole gamification, the whole networked governance system. So I got it. Here we go.
So we can embed these rules into smart contracts in order to enable the agents to cluster in the most productive way and optimize over a goal. The flows can lead to cascading failures, but on the other side, if we plan the flows for the critical hubs to actually not have that kind of weight and criticality, we can design robust networks. So this balance, the topology dynamics, is pretty crucial when we want to control the flows through networks in order to, like, it can be flows of people, like interactions, or flows in case of people interactions that can accelerate or decelerate. So we can optimize the networks across all these parameters is following exactly how nature is optimizing for robustness. So this process of organic governance, just as you have seen with the ants optimizing for the path to the food and from the food to their workplace, we can have these norms and rules in our institutions emerge from the individual agent interactions. And as I mentioned before, this can be encoded in DAOs. And once we encode them, so it's not encoded once and for all. So if I have a certain goal, I can run a simulation in which, of course, this is a physical world. We have the agents in the digital world modeling the physical world. So we have this digital twin of the world, and then we can run simulation across all these agents and reorganize our structures, our organization. They can be even our stores or offices, so that when we come back to work, we optimize not only for productivity, but we optimize also for health. Then we can have a different restructuring of our physical world, which the software would enable. But these rules would emerge from the individual agent interactions that are revealed by the simulation.
Wow. I mean, it's fascinating because now, like, I recorded this before I found Alicia Guerrero. So the idea of topology and dynamic interactions and fitness and reshaping through smart contracts, didn't really have that under my belt. But listening to her now, I can see exactly how this is going to work, because again, they're going to have adjusting the fitness landscapes, and they're going to use the DAOs and the smart contracts to do that dynamically based on what? The agent interactions. And Quantum Heart Cafe, like their recent guest post about Emergence, Stephen Johnson's book Emergence, they were literally, I don't know, Quantum Heart, if you can remind me, Deborah Gordon, was that her name? Or is that somebody from Batman? I don't remember. But like, I think she was a scientist in studying ants and about the signaling of their antenna. And that it really wasn't even the content of the exchange, but it was the networks of exchange that was like the information, whether they were interacting, they were changing their tasks based on if they encountered people who were like nest builders or care workers or something, they could tell there wasn't much of a communication other than I am a this. And then they could tell based on the frequency of the interaction what job was needed. And then they would change their job if the ant colony needed more of the nest builders, then based on the interactions, they would change their job and go build more nests. And so it was this frequency, which sounds exactly like what Uluru was talking about, like the workers coming back to the office and then changing for their safety and their health. And it's fascinating, actually.
Right.
Like, if it's not so unsettling, it's fascinating to just have it be so clear.
Well, she said, like, control the flow, control the flow of people, or the flow. But we did that thing on Flow, the new Adam Newman, and I'm curious if they've got any tokenized schemes. I'm sure that I'd be surprised if they don't.
I think the whole thing is going to be, I mean, those planned communities that Newman is setting up with Andreessen, they're all going to be run on tokens. I mean, that was the key part, is that you could be a renter, but you could earn equity somehow in the common good.
Well, and the housing themselves are tokenized. So the idea that, I mean, I haven't done a deep dive into it, but I sent you that one thing about the tokenized, your housing, and that's actually connected with Andreessen as well. Like, they've got a whole thing that's going to be connected with you're going to be like renting to own, but you can own up to, I think they said you can own up to like 25%, or I can't remember what it was, but you never get full ownership. It's because it's your home is now tokenized, and the ownership of your home is spread amongst a whole bunch of different people and agents. Some of them they may not even be non-humans. It's a portfolio. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Well, and how much power are you going to have in that situation?
It was mentioned, like, equating the ant colonies to like these glass high rises in downtown Vancouver that are going up all over everywhere. So I chose one that was very modern looking and sort of this idea of clustered behaviors. But if your house is your extraction, is your cyber physical system that's pulling the data, like, again, Bruce Pond is saying, like, okay, you have to show that you did your steps and that you took care of your nutrition and that you did your social media, blah, 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 blah. Like, your house is in part of that infrastructure of the flow.
Yeah.
Now, we didn't know about the watersheds and epigenetic landscapes when we did that flow series.
Right.
I had a sense of it, but like, I didn't know specifically how it might work. So to me, that was pretty amazing, is to now actually go back and think back about flow and understand it as a watershed, as an energetic landscape that's driving very inexorably towards a certain optimization point that we we didn't choose maybe.
Right. And real quick, this is who Uluru.
Yeah, Michaela Uluru, engineer, lecturer, scientific researcher, Romanian engineer, grantee German Research Foundation 1991 to 93, German Ministry of Culture 93 to 95, member American Association for the Advancement of Science, Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, SMC Society, Neural Networks Council, New York Academy of Sciences, International Federation, Automatic Control Technical Committee. She was born in 1962. And I mean, I'll give her that. She's very enthusiastic. I mean, like, she's kind of there. She's kind of like Zargham for me. Like, at least she's pretty clear about what they're doing.
Yeah.
Like, she's open enough. Like, I think both she and Zargham would probably be like, oh, cybernetic control of the world could be a totally great thing, right? Like, we could totally engineer some wonderful outcome for this.
Or like the other guy, we're going to live in the machine and we're going to become more like the machine. And I support that. Well, we could deal with that. Like, okay, here's someone who's being straight about it. And then people can say, well, is that something you support? Like,
yeah, exactly. We could just be honest. But like, Bruce Pond isn't really talking about that. He's not really saying like, oh, by the way, we're going to create all sorts of derivatives products on your behavior.
Yeah. That's for another audience, Alison.
Exactly. That's for the IEEE people and whatever, the NBER, National. So I think we just have one more, and this is just the Alicia Warrero, and it's super short. But again, this epigenetic landscape, on the one hand, you have the hills with the little ball, and then on the other side, you have the cross section underneath, which is the structure that's creating the hills. And that's what I think the protocol layer is meant to do.
Right.
And I'll close with this image because I really like it. This is a standard epigenetic landscape that Conrad Waddington formulated, I don't know, 50s, 40s, I don't know. But imagine if you only thought in terms of energetic power relations. All people would think of is pushing the ball here to counteract gravity and try to get it over this hump. But if you look at the right-hand image, you realize that it's all these underlying constraints that are creating the landscape that if you were able to adjust the constraints that produce the landscape, you would change the topology of the landscape and the system might go in the direction that you wanted it to. So the suggestion that complex system has is you're better off trying to manage an ongoing complex system by focusing on the constraints that underpin or subtend the obvious surface phenomena than it is to try to change it through powers.
Yeah. So work from underneath, right? Work from underneath. And and I see, so there someone left a comment about conflict mitigation, like Web3 has a potential. And so my sense is actually, in looking at some of the history of this, the origins, the idea of like a world brain, it connects to world peace, which again, as somebody who's like anti-empire, anti-war, it's hard to say that there would be a problem with the idea of peace, but the question is, do we want a cybernetic peace or a cybernetic peace with the internet of everything involving like, potentially mind wiping us, to get to that place? And then what is decided for that? But in the late 19th, early 20th century, there was these two brothers, the Smalley brothers, who were from Maine originally. They went to Haverford College, which is a Quaker college outside of Philly, near Bryn Mawr, and they were Quaker, and they ran a resort on the Hudson called the Mohonk House. It's still a resort. It's a beautiful Victorian resort. And at the time, they identified as sort of, social justice, but they would meet in the shoulder season, sort of after the high season of the resort and before they closed it for the winter in the fall. And they would bring all these dignitaries and they would talk about like the Negro problem or the Indian problem or whatever. And it was framed as sort of a, paternalistic social, trying to address like the terrible condition of people. But it was also these power players, and Andrew Carnegie was present. And as this evolved, it also evolved into something called like an international legal like arbitration system, like this idea of like global arbitration. So I think that the smart contract protocol layer is actually linked to the arbitration. And then ultimately in the early 20th century, that connection between Carnegie, which later had the Carnegie Endowment for Peace, went on to The Hague and the International Court at The Hague. And then at The Hague, Carnegie built a whole peace palace, right? And then the Carnegie Peace Endowment has been central to all of this. And they're actually like promoting the Japan Moonshot Project, which the first goal is like by 2050, we exist outside of a mind and body and time and space. So I guess you could imagine how in the name of world peace, quote unquote, or homeostasis or control, like you could use an arbitration protocol layer to accomplish some sort of balancing act. But then the question is, again, are we, in pursuing that, do we become, like, is our humanity innately changed by the mechanics of the protocol layer require a cyber physical system, which is nanotechnology, which is ubiquitous sensing, which is digital identity, which is a digital twin, which is predictive analytics. And then we know that foundationally, all of that is embedded in defense, contracting, and finance sectors.
Right.
And the finance sectors are synthetic derivatives that people are packaging people as debt and trading it based on behavioral data. So like my question is like, what kind of conflict? Like, because if you mitigate blowing people up with missiles or drones or mines, yeah, okay, but are you doing that because you've inserted yourself into their consciousness and they're no longer actually in control of like anything in their life? Like, is that a trade-off we want to make? And I mean, I don't think I think there must be other options besides those two options.
Yeah. I have one other thing here. I don't know if the Holland one, did you want to talk about that?
Oh, do we have Holland?
I have a, you just sent this.
I just underlined.
Oh, okay. Oh, was that the table of contents? Okay, I couldn't quite read that. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Just making sure I had everything in my queue here. Yeah, well, I mean, I think we hopefully, I'll be curious to hear people's thoughts on this, but we didn't really have any questions.
Well, I see somebody was asking epigenetics and eugenics. So eugenics is, I did a whole series on sort of eugenics and the Human Betterment Foundation, which is the west coast of Cold Spring Harbor Labs. And I would say on the eugenics, this idea is optimization. A lot of it is framed, again, and not inaccurately, as racialization or ableist, being that like forced sterilization of people of color, Black women, Indigenous women, women with physical or learning disabilities. And that was one important and very terrible aspect of eugenics. But the other piece was sort of built on a lot of like agriculture and hybridization and like horse breeding and dog breeding, was that you want a perfect specimen. You want a specimen that is like excels for something. And so I think we are in a eugenics program now, but it's less about like, and I do think that environmentally, clearly there are a lot of people who like at a societal level, there are huge numbers of fertility problems. So in that way, maybe it's not like a surgical sterilization, but an environmental sterilization. But in and of itself, the fertility issues are leading to more in vitro fertilization, which is clearly linked to eugenics, because you would screen the embryos and then implant only the best, however you define by best and optimization. So I believe that they're still optimizing, that optimization is continuing all throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, but towards this guided evolution, towards more of a synthetic telepathy, of a collective consciousness, of something that is less corporeal and more psychic, for lack of a better word. Now, epigenetics are, as I understand it, traits that is it genetic traits that are acquired? No, that's like Lamarckian epigenetics. Yeah, that are acquired after you're born, but that can be transmitted to your children. And so there's Lamarckian, like Lamarck versus Neo-Darwinian, and Lamarck was saying like you could have lived experience in your life that would lead your DNA to change, and that you could convey those changes to your progeny. And so I think what he's saying in epigenetic landscape is slightly different. And I'd have to look that up a little bit more. But like Conrad Waddington, he was the guy who was promoting the epigenetic landscape. But I think it's less about gene engineering and more about the conditions of the DNA. And it might have something to do with the quote unquote junk DNA, and that environmental conditions can activate it. So there's a lot of conversation around epigenetics and trauma and ACEs scores. So childhood trauma, act like you could inherit epigenetic trauma from your ancestors due to their traumatic experiences, which I believe is actually accurate. But that's another area that you hear a lot about epigenetics, and it's factored into the ACEs scores.
What are your thoughts on, because there's talk about communities that have experienced that historic trauma, and my brain just quit working. It's been a long thing. I'm
always long. We don't ever go on less than 3.5 hours.
Listen, you started out. We're gonna do a short talk here. What do you call that with like for people that had slaves that were African slaves that we want to pay them back? What's the word?
Reparations.
Reparations. God, I don't even know why my brain just like shut down.
I know.
So
that almost shorted me out. I was like,
reparations. So what are your thoughts on like reparations and how it relates to some of this stuff? And because it also, there's idea of payment. Because I thought about like reparations in terms of that's a way you could get large communities of people to take on new tokens or something like that.
you know what I mean? Ibram Kendi, who actually got his PhD at Temple University here in Philadelphia, he presented at the Library Company, I don't know, like 5 years ago. It was before he came out with his like How to Be Anti-Racist book. And you know me, I'm always like, questions, like, and it was his talk was almost all about reparations. And so I went up to him afterwards, because I even bought his book, which now I feel kind of stupid about, because clearly he's like, a narrative shaper for where things are headed. But I said, hey, I'm looking at this stuff with South Africa and preschool and putting children on blockchain, and I can totally see how the reparations would be blockchained. Like, and then even within the Black community, I think there are more, is it like a dose or whatever, like, that like reparations should just go not to Black people, but people with like genetic ancestry directly to Africa, which would require a genetic profiling, right? Which would totally feed into the biometric data harvest. And now I'm not saying that the people who were involved in that narrative knew that.
Right.
But I said, I have a lot of concerns, because I think like we haven't overthrown the system. Like, we're not knuckling under the big technology. So if they're running down the road going, sure, we'd love to offer you reparations, like, I think everyone should sort of pull back and go, like, wow, how is that? So yeah, to me, it's like a no-brainer, but like, he was not going to say anything because he's part of the other narrative. And I would say, like, I don't think we mainstream medicine, I don't think we understand how the body works. And there's like questions about like harmonics and other stuff. I think in a lot of the part about genetic modification, I think there's so much more to how the body works that a lot of that is actually a distraction from some of the other more important things about like resonance, about like, I'm very interested, the more I was looking at masking threshold and vibration in cells, about the structured water, right? And water memory. And, it would be really great if Tom Cowan would get back on and do more about like that aspect, because now that's starting to make a lot more sense to me about how the water might feed into water and cell membranes into what's happening. So yeah, like the DNA stuff is part of it, but I think there are a lot of other moving pieces, again, that affect like environmental factors that affect the gene expression and other things that we just don't even know the half of it yet.
Gotcha. Someone asked about this book, How to Be a Cisrat Surrealist. I'm not familiar with that.
No,
I don't know if
I'm not.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot.
We did.
Yeah, I think we did.
Thank you. Thank you for humoring me.
Yeah, no, I think it was a good conversation, and it's every time.
So when the next time somebody wants to sell you, hey, you want to buy some community currency? You want to earn some tokens?
It's funny. I actually have. I have some right over here. I have some Berkshires. You went to the Berkshires. I actually have. I was collecting some community currencies, so I've got some. I have several.
You should have done a show and tell.
I should. Oh, hold on.
Did you have it? Fenny Wang. So Fenny Wang, she's connected to that Humanity Cache. And she was doing a presentation where they were connected, like a reboot of Berkshires, which is, again, in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, and connected to the Schumacher Institute, which, again, you think about the whole Great Barrington Declaration and the overlap of all of that. So did you find it? Oh,
boom! I don't know if you can see that. I'd zoom it in close, but I don't have.
What's in their hand? Is it a gun?
It
or a
looks.
plow?
It's like a native person, and they've got like a thing on their back. I can't really tell if it's like a stick with a thing on it, but I can't tell if it's a gun or a. You can't see the front of it, so I can't really.
Oh, okay.
I'll scan it and send it to you. I'll take a photo. You can look at it closer.
They might get you for a counterfeit.
So this is one Berkshire. Well, I don't think this is legal tender, so I don't think it.
Oh.
Community, economy, ecology, sustainability. Yeah, I got this a whole bunch of years when I was up in the Berkshires.
But isn't it interesting, though, how it's framed within sustainability and ecology, right?
Right.
And again, like, I'm somebody who supports the environment. I'm not anti the environment, right? But that it's embedded. If you look at Saudi, right? If you look at Howard Odom, it's always been the energy economics. And again, like, on the other hand, you have the technocracy people, the Patrick Wood people, who are pitching a narrative about like engineered currency run by, the elite planners, which is just is a different kind of piece, right? Like, that's the flag waving patriot kind of, don't do this to us because we're the United States. But that narrative is never going to kind of get you down to what we're talking about.
Right.
So,
great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you, Alison, for putting all that time and energy into putting this together. And
thanks for facilitating and
Yep.
and thinking about money. And so anyway, share this with your friends who think that like any kind of digital programmable money are the answer.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things that I'm like, oh, really? That too?
I know.
Oh man,
I'm such a downer. You're
it's
like,
like
Alison,
it's
everything
like,
I want.
why can't I get behind something? Everything's, but we're working towards something. You know, we're on a very, very long road.
Exactly, long and winding road. Okay.